Hey there. Tonight, we're stepping into a world carved from marble and myth, where gods walked among mortals and heroes were forged in fire and fate. This isn't a tale of simple heroics or clear-cut victories. This is the story of Achilles, the greatest warrior who ever lived, and the heavy price of glory. You won't find easy answers here or flawless champions, just a life shaped by prophecy, rage, love, and the knowledge that even the mightiest must fall. If these ancient stories help you drift into peaceful sleep, you can like and subscribe, but only if they truly bring you calm. And if you'd like to help our channel grow, your support means more than you can imagine. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from, the time on your clock, and if you still have a little energy left, send it our way. It's oddly comforting to know who else is drifting off to the same ancient rhythms of gods and mortals. So, dim the lights. Let the fires of Troy flicker in your imagination. Settle in, and let's begin with the making of a legend. You are about to walk alongside the swift-footed Achilles, from his first breath to his final one, through every battle, every friendship, every moment of rage and tenderness that defined him. This is his complete story. This is the weight of being almost immortal in a mortal world. The divine origins and the river Styx. Before Achilles drew his first breath, his story was already tangled with the affairs of gods. His mother was Thetis, a sea goddess, one of the 50 Nereids who danced through ocean depths and commanded the respect of both mortals and immortals. Beautiful beyond measure, with hair like sea foam and eyes that held the deep's mystery, Thetis caught the attention of the most powerful beings in existence. Both Zeus, king of the gods, and his brother Poseidon, lord of the seas, desired her. They pursued her with the intensity that only immortals possess, each certain that she would bear them children worthy of legend. But then came the prophecy. The oracle spoke, and its words sent tremors through Olympus. Any son born to Thetis would be greater than his father, greater in strength, greater in glory, destined to surpass the one who sired him. Zeus, who had overthrown his own father Cronus, understood immediately what this meant. He could not risk a son who might one day dethrone him, as he had dethroned his father. Poseidon, too, withdrew his suit. The prophecy was too dangerous. And so, with a mixture of relief and regret, the gods decided that Thetis must marry a mortal, someone whose son could be great without threatening the cosmic order. They chose Peleus, king of Phthia in northern Greece. He was a good man, a hero who had sailed with Jason and the Argonauts, who had proven himself in battle and earned the respect of gods and men alike. But he was still mortal, still bound by time and death. Thetis resisted at first. The marriage was arranged against her will. This goddess of the depths forced to wed a man who would age and die while she remains eternally young. But the gods had spoken, and even a goddess must sometimes bend. Their wedding was a grand affair, attended by both mortals and immortals. All the gods came bearing gifts. The great centaur Chiron, wisest of his kind, presented Peleus with a spear made from ash wood, a weapon that would one day pass to his son. Apollo brought music. Athena brought wisdom. Even Zeus himself attended, blessing the union he had orchestrated. But there was one goddess who was not invited. Eris, goddess of discord, was left off the guest list, and her revenge would echo through the ages. She appeared anyway, uninvited, and threw into the celebration a golden apple inscribed with the words, "To the fairest." The apple sparked a bitter quarrel among Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, a dispute that would eventually lead to the Trojan War. But that night, as wine flowed and music played, no one yet knew how far-reaching that petty slight would become. From this union of goddess and mortal came a son. Thetis named him Achilles. She looked at her baby, this perfect blend of divine and mortal, and her heart broke a little, because she could see what Peleus could not. This child would die. Despite her immortal blood flowing in his veins, he had inherited his father's mortality. He would grow old, he would die, and there was nothing more terrible to an immortal than watching someone they love succumb to time. Thetis could not accept this. She would not stand by and watch her son fade like all mortals do. And so she began attempting to make him immortal, to burn away his mortal parts and leave only the divine. Some stories say she held him over sacred fires at night, anointing him with ambrosia, the food of the gods, slowly burning away his mortality. But one night Peleus discovered her, saw his wife holding their infant son in flames, and cried out in horror. The ritual was interrupted. Achilles' mortal heel, the part she had been about to purify, remained untouched. The more famous version tells of Thetis taking her infant son to the river Styx, the dark river that winds through the underworld, separating the living from the dead. Its waters held terrible power. They could grant invulnerability, making flesh impervious to any weapon. Thetis descended to that dreadful place, holding her baby carefully, and dipped him into the black waters. Everywhere the water touched, his skin became harder than bronze, stronger than iron. No blade could pierce it. No arrow could wound it. But she held him by his heel. Her fingers gripped his tiny ankle as she submerged him, and that one spot where her divine hand grasped him never touched the water. That one vulnerable point remained. It was a small thing, easily overlooked, a tiny patch of mortal flesh on an otherwise invulnerable body. No one thought much of it at the time. How could anyone possibly strike such a precise target in the chaos of battle? And so Achilles grew, seemingly invincible, with a mother who loved him desperately, and a secret weakness that would one day destroy him. Thetis returned to the sea sometimes, unable to bear the domestic life of a mortal household. She would visit her son, bring him gifts from the ocean depths, whisper prophecies and warnings in his ear. But she could not stay. The call of the waves was too strong, and the knowledge of his fate too painful. Peleus raised his son as best he could, this boy who was half god, who could run faster than any child had a right to, who never seemed to tire, who showed a natural affinity for combat, even in play. The boy had his mother's grace and his father's courage. He was beautiful, with golden hair and eyes that seemed to reflect both sky and sea. Other children could not keep up with him. He outpaced them in every game, every race, every contest of strength. But there was something in young Achilles that troubled those who looked closely, a wildness, a rage that simmered just beneath the surface. When provoked, even as a small child, his anger was terrible and swift. He did not forgive easily. He did not forget slights. It was as if his mother's immortal passion and his father's mortal intensity had combined to create something almost too fierce to contain. Peleus knew his son needed more than he could provide. The boy needed guidance, discipline, an education fit for someone who was more than mortal but less than God. He needed to learn to control the fire that burned in him. And so, when Achilles was still young, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, Peleus made a decision that would shape the boy's entire life. He would send his son to be educated by Chiron, the wisest of all centaurs, the teacher of heroes. The education of Achilles, years with Chiron. Mount Pelion rose in the distance, its peaks shrouded in mist and mystery. This was where Chiron made his home, in a cave halfway up the mountain, surrounded by forests that teemed with game and streams that ran crystal clear. Peleus brought his son to this wild place, to the centaur who had taught so many heroes before him. Jason, Asclepius, Heracles himself had all studied under Chiron's patient guidance. Chiron was unlike other centaurs, where his kin were savage and wild, given to drunkenness and violence. Chiron was gentle, wise, and civilized. He wore robes like a man. He walked with dignity. His human half bore the lined face of a scholar, eyes that held deep knowledge, hands that could heal as easily as they could wield a weapon. His equine half was powerful and sleek, built for the mountains. He had been born differently, too. His father was Cronus himself, the ancient Titan, who had taken the form of a horse to avoid his wife's jealous gaze. His mother was the nymph Philyra. This made Chiron neither truly centaur nor truly god, but something in between, something unique. He had been raised by Apollo and Artemis, taught music and medicine, archery and hunting, and now he took that knowledge and passed it on to the children of heroes. When young Achilles arrived, Chiron looked at him with those ancient, knowing eyes, and saw immediately what the boy was. Saw the divine fire in him, but also the mortal vulnerability. Saw the potential for greatness and the seeds of tragedy. He accepted the boy without question, as he had accepted all his students, and began the long process of shaping raw talent into refined skill. The education was comprehensive, demanding, sometimes brutal. Chiron believed in testing his students, pushing them beyond what they thought possible. Each day began before dawn. Achilles would wake on his pallet of pine boughs, the cold mountain air sharp in his lungs, and Chiron would already be waiting. No words of greeting, just a gesture to follow, and they would be off into the wilderness. First came physical training. Achilles learned to run, not on smooth paths, but on rocky slopes, through dense underbrush, across rushing streams. His legs grew strong from climbing. His lungs expanded from the thin mountain air. Chiron taught him to move like the animals did, to place his feet with care, to read the ground beneath him, to spring and leap and land without stumbling. By the time he was 10, Achilles could outrun deer. By 12, he could track mountain lions. Hunting was essential. They tracked game through the forests, learning patience, learning to read signs that most men would miss. A broken twig, disturbed leaves, the faint scent of musk on the wind. Chiron taught them which animals to pursue and which to leave alone, how to bring down prey with bow and spear, how to skin and dress the carcass, how to give thanks to Artemis for the kill. But Chiron also fed him strange foods, believing they would make him strong. The innards of lions, he said, would give him courage. The flesh of wild boars would grant ferocity, bear marrow for strength, wolf meat for cunning. Achilles ate them all, these raw and bloody offerings, and whether it was the food or simply the training, he grew fierce and powerful. Combat training was constant and unforgiving. Chiron had collected weapons from many fallen heroes, and he taught Achilles to use them all. The sword first, showing him how to hold it, how to strike, how to defend. Wooden swords at first, practice against practice, but even wood could bruise and break fingers if you were careful. Achilles learned to move his feet, to shift his weight, to read an opponent's eyes for the tell of their next move. The spear came next. This was the weapon of heroes, Chiron explained, more noble than the sword, requiring more skill. You had to understand distance, timing, the way a spear balanced in your hand. They practiced throwing at targets, at first missing more than hitting, but gradually his aim improved. Then came fighting with the spear, keeping enemies at bay, the thrust and withdraw, the deadly dance of armed combat. Archery required different skills: stillness, breath control, the ability to wait for the perfect moment. Chiron himself was a master archer, taught by Artemis, and he passed these skills with infinite patience. Stand like this, breathe like that, feel the wind, trust your instinct, release. Achilles' arrows flew swift and true, striking targets from distances that should have been impossible for a boy his age. But Chiron did not believe in creating a weapon without a mind. In the evenings, after the day's physical training, there were lessons of a different sort. Chiron taught him to play the lyre, to coax music from its strings. At first, Achilles' calloused fingers fumbled with the delicate instrument. His hands were made for gripping swords, not plucking notes. But Chiron was patient, demonstrating melodies, singing ancient songs, explaining that a true hero must know beauty as well as battle. Music, Chiron said, soothed the savage heart. It reminded a warrior of what he fought to protect. It connected him to something beyond bloodshed. And so Achilles learned. He learned to play the old songs, the hymns to the gods, the laments for fallen heroes. He learned that his voice, when he chose to use it, could be as powerful as his sword arm. Medicine was equally important. Chiron showed him which herbs healed and which poisoned, how to clean a wound, how to set a broken bone, how to treat fever and infection. The centaur had a vast knowledge of remedies passed down from Apollo himself, and he shared it freely. A warrior, he explained, must be able to care for his comrades when no healer is near. Achilles learned to identify plants, to prepare poultices, to use honey and wine as antiseptics. These skills would serve him well in years to come. There were moral lessons too, though these were harder to instill. Chiron spoke of justice, of honor, of the difference between glory earned and glory stolen. He told stories of heroes who had fallen not to enemy blades, but to their own pride. He warned against excessive anger, against holding grudges, against letting rage cloud judgment. Achilles listened, though whether he truly heard these warnings is debatable. Even then, his temper was legendary among Chiron's students. For Achilles was not alone on Mount Pelion. Other boys came to study under Chiron, sons of nobles and heroes, all seeking the education that would make them great. Among them was Patroclus, a boy slightly older than Achilles, quieter, gentler, but no less brave. Patroclus had been sent to Chiron after accidentally killing another boy in a quarrel over dice. He carried guilt for that death, a somber awareness of how fragile life could be. The two became inseparable. Where Achilles was fire, Patroclus was water. Where Achilles burned with ambition and rage, Patroclus offered calm and reason. They trained together, ate together, slept side by side in the cave. Patroclus learned to anticipate Achilles' moods, to know when to push him and when to hold him back. He was the one who could talk Achilles down from his rages, who could make him laugh when darkness threatened. Music, Chiron said, also gave Achilles beauty. He learned to sing, to play the lyre, to coax music from its strings. At first, Achilles' calloused fingers fumbled with the delicate instrument. His hands were made for gripping swords, not plucking notes. But Chiron was patient, demonstrating melodies, singing ancient songs, explaining that a true hero must know beauty as well as battle. Music, Chiron said, soothed the savage heart. It reminded a warrior of what he fought to protect. It connected him to something beyond bloodshed. And so Achilles learned. He learned to play the old songs, the hymns to the gods, the laments for fallen heroes. He learned that his voice, when he chose to use it, could be as powerful as his sword arm. Medicine was equally important. Chiron showed him which herbs healed and which poisoned, how to clean a wound, how to set a broken bone, how to treat fever and infection. The centaur had a vast knowledge of remedies passed down from Apollo himself, and he shared it freely. A warrior, he explained, must be able to care for his comrades when no healer is near. Achilles learned to identify plants, to prepare poultices, to use honey and wine as antiseptics. These skills would serve him well in years to come. There were moral lessons too, though these were harder to instill. Chiron spoke of justice, of honor, of the difference between glory earned and glory stolen. He told stories of heroes who had fallen not to enemy blades, but to their own pride. He warned against excessive anger, against holding grudges, against letting rage cloud judgment. Achilles listened, though whether he truly heard these warnings is debatable. Even then, his temper was legendary among Chiron's students. For Achilles was not alone on Mount Pelion. Other boys came to study under Chiron, sons of nobles and heroes, all seeking the education that would make them great. Among them was Patroclus, a boy slightly older than Achilles, quieter, gentler, but no less brave. Patroclus had been sent to Chiron after accidentally killing another boy in a quarrel over dice. He carried guilt for that death, a somber awareness of how fragile life could be. The two became inseparable. Where Achilles was fire, Patroclus was water. Where Achilles burned with ambition and rage, Patroclus offered calm and reason. They trained together, ate together, slept side by side in the cave. Patroclus learned to anticipate Achilles' moods, to know when to push him and when to hold him back. He was the one who could talk Achilles down from his rages, who could make him laugh when darkness threatened. Chiron watched their friendship develop and knew it was important. Every hero needs an anchor, he would say, someone to remind him of his humanity. Achilles had found his in Patroclus. The bond between them grew deeper than brotherhood, more profound than simple friendship. They became each other's other half, completing what was incomplete, balancing what was unbalanced. Years passed in this way. The mountain became Achilles' world. He knew every trail, every cave, every stream. He grew tall and strong, his body hardening into a warrior. His hair lightened in the sun, his skin bronzed. His hands developed the calluses of constant weapon work. He could bring down a stag with a single arrow. He could wrestle grown men to the ground. He was fast, faster than anyone had ever seen, earning him the epithet that would follow him forever: swift-footed Achilles. But underneath the discipline and training, something else was growing. A restlessness, a sense that the mountain, however wild, was too small to contain him. Stories reached them even in Chiron's isolated cave. Stories of the wider world, of kingdoms and wars, of opportunities for glory. Achilles listened to these tales with hunger in his eyes. He had been trained for something, he could feel it, a purpose waiting to claim him. Chiron saw it too. He knew his time with Achilles was coming to an end. The boy had learned everything he could teach. More importantly, the prophecy that had marked Achilles from birth was beginning to stir. Word was spreading of a gathering conflict, of ships being prepared, of the greatest military expedition ever assembled. And at its center was Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world, stolen from her husband by a Trojan prince named Paris. The Trojan War was coming, and with it, Achilles' destiny. But first, his mother would make one last desperate attempt to save her son from the fate she knew awaited him. The prophecy revealed and hidden years on Skyros. Thetis had always known. But if he went to Troy, everything changed. He would become the greatest warrior the world had ever seen. His name would echo through eternity. Poets would sing of him for thousands of years. He would be glory incarnate, the standard against which all future heroes would be measured. But he would never return. He would die young, die in battle, die far from home. He would never know old age or peaceful twilight years. Just a brief, brilliant flame, then darkness. Thetis understood what most mortals could not. She had seen empires rise and fall. She had watched heroes come and go. She knew that fame, even eternal fame, was cold comfort to those who mourned. What good was glory to a dead man? What good was eternal renown to a mother who had lost her son? She would have chosen obscurity for him every time. She would have chosen his life over his legend. And so, when word reached her that the Greeks were gathering for war, that they were calling on all the great heroes to sail to Troy, that they specifically needed Achilles because a prophecy said Troy could not fall without him, Thetis acted. She would not let them have her son. She would not feed him to this war machine. She would hide him where no one would think to look. She came to Peleus and demanded their son. The king tried to argue, but what mortal could withstand a goddess's will? She took Achilles, now 17 and in the full bloom of youth, and spirited him away to the island of Skyros. There ruled King Lycomedes, who owed Thetis a favor and was too wise to refuse a request from a Nereid. Thetis's plan was simple but radical. She would disguise Achilles as a girl and hide him among Lycomedes' daughters. No one would look for a hero among women. No one would recognize the greatest warrior of the age in a modest dress, with his hair braided and his weapons hidden away. She used divine glamour to soften his features, to hide the obvious masculinity of his form. She instructed him to speak softly, to move gracefully, to be Pyrrha, just another of the king's many daughters. Achilles agreed, though it grated against everything he was. He did it for his mother, because he could see the desperation in her eyes, the ancient fear of loss that drove her. He told himself it was temporary, just until the war fever passed, just until the Greeks gave up and went home. He could wait out a season, maybe two. Then he could return to his real life. But days turned to weeks, and weeks to months. Achilles lived among the women, learning their ways, their routines. He sat with them as they wove. He walked with them in the garden. He learned their songs and their stories. It was not entirely unpleasant. The king's daughters were kind to him, thinking him one of their own, a sister who had been away and returned. They taught him to braid hair, to mix cosmetics, to move with the graceful restraint expected of noble women. One of them, Diademia, was particularly attentive. She was close to his age, beautiful in a gentle way, with dark eyes that seemed to see more than they should. At first, Achilles thought she suspected his disguise. But no, she was simply drawn to him, to this new sister who seemed different somehow, more intense, more present. As time passed, the pretense became harder to maintain. Achilles could feel his warrior's body growing soft from inactivity. His muscles, so carefully developed on Mount Pelion, began to fade from disuse. He watched the other girls practice harmless crafts, while his hands itched for sword and spear.
The confinement was suffocating. He was a hunting falcon trapped in a gilded cage, and every day the bars seemed tighter. Late at night, when the household slept, Achilles would sometimes slip away to practice in secret, shadow fighting in the moonlight, going through the forms Chiron had taught him, trying to maintain some shred of his training. Diademia found him one night, moving through sword forms with invisible weapons, his dress hiked up to allow movement. She should have screamed, should have alerted the guards. Instead, she approached quietly and whispered, "I know what you are." Achilles froze, ready to run, but she held up a hand. "I've known for weeks. Your mother's glamour is good, but not perfect. I see the warrior beneath the dress. I see how you watch the horizon like you're waiting for battle horns." She smiled sadly. "I won't tell anyone, but you should know, whatever you're hiding from will find you anyway. That kind of destiny doesn't give up." She was right. In Diademia, Achilles found something he hadn't expected: understanding, companionship beyond disguise. They began meeting in secret, Achilles dropping the pretense when they were alone, being himself. And from that honesty grew something more. They became lovers, careful and quiet, stealing moments in the dark. It complicated everything. It made Achilles' exile both more bearable and more painful. And then one day, roughly a year into his hiding, Diademia told him she was pregnant. They both knew what this meant. His mother's plan had failed in a way neither of them anticipated. The child would be his legacy, proof of his presence on the island, but also a tie to a life he increasingly felt he was not meant to live. And then the Greeks came. Not armies, but a single ship, carrying two men: Odysseus, king of Ithaca, known as the cleverest of all Greeks, and Diomedes, one of the finest warriors. They came as merchants, they claimed, bearing gifts for King Lycomedes and his daughters. But their true purpose was darker. They had learned from the prophet Calchas that Troy would never fall without Achilles. And through clever inquiry and generous bribes, they had traced the hero to Skyros.
The ship docked. The men approached the palace with bags of treasures. Lycomedes welcomed them, always happy to receive traders who brought exotic goods. His daughters gathered eagerly when they heard merchants had come with gifts from across the seas. Achilles, still disguised as Pyrrha, joined them reluctantly, his mother's warnings echoing in his mind. Odysseus spread out his wares with a performer's flair: jewels and silks, mirrors and perfumes, cosmetics and delicate ornaments, the kind of things women were expected to desire. The daughters cooed and exclaimed, reaching for pretty things, holding them up to admire. But hidden among the feminine luxuries were other items: a sword, its edge sharp enough to catch the light; a shield, small but finely made; a spear with a balanced shaft and bronze tip. The girls ignored these. What use did they have for weapons? But Achilles couldn't help himself. His eyes were drawn to the sword as a lodestone draws iron. His hand moved before his mind could stop it,
reaching past silk and jewels to grasp the leather-wrapped hilt. His fingers closed around it with the familiarity of long practice, and for a moment everything else faded. This was what he was made for. This felt right in a way nothing had felt right for a year. He looked up to find Odysseus watching him with a knowing smile. "Found you?" the king of Ithaca said simply. Some versions of the story say Odysseus arranged an attack on the palace at that moment. A blast of horns and clash of weapons, making all the women scatter in fear, while Achilles instinctively grabbed the weapons to defend them. Others say the sword alone was enough, that Odysseus simply observed who among the daughters reached for weapons instead of fleeing. Either way, the result was the same. The disguise was pierced. Achilles was revealed. Thetis appeared then, materializing from mist and spray, her face stricken. She had failed. Her attempt to save her son had come to nothing. But she was a goddess, and goddesses do not plead. She stood before her son with terrible dignity, and gave him the choice the prophecy demanded. "Stay here," she said. "Raise your child with Diademia. Live a long life. Die in peace. No one will remember your name 100 years now, but you will have lived. Or go with these men. Fight at Troy. Become everything you were meant to be. Die young, die in foreign soil, but live forever in song and story." Achilles looked at Diademia, who carried his child. He thought of the quiet life on Skyros, of growing old and forgotten. Then he looked at the sword in his hand, at Odysseus and Diomedes waiting, at the ship that would carry him to the greatest war the world had ever known. His mother already knew what he would choose. She had always known. Her son was not made for obscurity. He was not for peace. He was made for glory, however brief and terrible. "I go to Troy," he said. Diademia wept. Thetis closed her eyes in resignation. But Achilles felt something he hadn't felt in a year. He felt alive. He kissed Diademia goodbye, promising to return, though they both knew he wouldn't. He would never meet his son Neoptolemus, who would be born after he left, and who would eventually come to Troy himself to avenge his father. But that was years away. In this moment, Achilles made his choice. Glory over longevity. Immortal fame over mortal comfort. He climbed aboard Odysseus's ship and sailed toward his destiny. Behind him, on the shores of Skyros, Thetis stood watching until the ship disappeared over the horizon, her heart breaking in the way only an immortal's can, knowing she would watch her son die, and that there was nothing left she could do to prevent it. The call to war and journey to Troy. The gathering at Aulis was unlike anything the world had seen before, or would see again. 1,000 ships, they would later say, though the actual count varied depending on who told the story. But the number didn't matter as much as what they represented. Every kingdom in Greece had sent men. Every hero who could lift a spear had answered the call. The beach was a forest of masts, the sea crowded with vessels. Agamemnon commanded the expedition, king of Mycenae, the most powerful ruler in Greece. He had called this war for his brother Menelaus, whose wife Helen had been taken by Paris, a prince of Troy. Some said Helen went willingly, seduced by Aphrodite's promise. Others claimed she was stolen against her will. The truth was probably somewhere between. But it didn't matter. Honor had been insulted. A Greek wife taken by a foreign prince. That couldn't stand. The gathering had its own dramas. There was Odysseus, who had tried to avoid the war by feigning madness, plowing his fields with salt until they brought his infant son and placed him in front of the plow, proving Odysseus was quite sane. There was Ajax, huge and powerful, bearing a shield the size of a door. There was Diomedes, young but fierce. Old Nestor, whose wisdom compensated for his age. Hundreds of warriors, thousands of soldiers, all converging on this one beach. And then Achilles arrived with the Myrmidons, the Ant-Men of Thessaly, his father's elite troops. 50 ships he brought, filled with warriors loyal to him alone. They made camp apart from the others, these men in their matching armor, disciplined and deadly. Patroclus was with him, of course. Where Achilles went, Patroclus followed. They had been reunited after the year on Skyros, and neither spoke of that separation. They were together now, and that was what mattered. Achilles was immediately recognizable, not just for his youth and beauty, but for something else, an aura almost, a sense that here was someone different, someone marked by fate. Other warriors looked at him with a mixture of admiration and unease. He was too perfect, too swift, too deadly in practice combat. There was something almost inhuman about his grace. Agamemnon tried to assert authority over all the forces, but Achilles made clear from the start that he and his Myrmidons followed their own counsel. He would fight for Greece, yes, but he was not Agamemnon's vassal. This caused tension immediately. Agamemnon was used to being obeyed without question. Achilles was used to being deferred to. Two proud men, two different kinds of authority. The conflict was inevitable. But before they could sail, the winds failed. The fleet sat at Aulis for weeks, going nowhere, supplies dwindling. The army grew restless. Fights broke out. Morale collapsed. Finally, the priest Calchas delivered the cause. The goddess Artemis was angry. Agamemnon had offended her, boasting that he was a better hunter than she. To appease her, he must sacrifice his daughter, Iphigenia. The king agonized. What kind of man sacrifices his own child? But what kind of king abandons his duty? In the end, he sent for her, claiming she was to marry Achilles, using the young hero's name as bait. When Iphigenia arrived, beautiful and innocent, trusting her father, Agamemnon could barely look at her. Some stories say she was actually sacrificed, that she walked to her death with dignity, giving her life for Greece's glory. Others say Artemis took pity at the last moment and substituted a deer, spiriting Iphigenia away to serve as a priestess in a far land. Either way, Achilles was furious that his name had been used in the deception. It was his first major grievance with Agamemnon, and he did not forget it. But the winds came. The fleet sailed. 1,000 ships crossing the Aegean headed for the towers of Troy. The journey took weeks. The ships island-hopped, stopping for water and supplies, sometimes raiding smaller settlements that were allied with Troy. Achilles began building his reputation even then. When they stopped at the island of Tenedos, he killed King Thetis in single combat. When they raided Lyrnessus, a city allied with Troy, Achilles led the charge and claimed the spoils. It was at Lyrnessus that he took Briseis as his war prize. She was a nobleman's daughter, taken captive when her city fell. By the customs of war, she belonged to Achilles as reward for his victory. She became his concubine, his possession. But their relationship was more complex than simple captivity. Achilles treated her with more kindness than most warriors showed their prizes. She, in turn, became loyal to him, preferring his protection to the chaos of a defeated city. Troy itself was a sight to humble even the proudest warrior. Its walls were massive, built by gods according to legend, so thick and high that siege engines seemed laughable against them. The city sat on a hill, overlooking the plain and the sea, its towers reaching toward the sky. Inside those walls lived 50,000 people, protected by the greatest defensive structure in the known world. The Greeks made camp on the beach, a sprawling city of tents and ships, wooden walls and watchtowers. They would live here for the next 10 years. A decade of intermittent fighting, of raids and counter-raids, of truces and betrayals. The war settled into a grinding siege, neither side able to gain decisive advantage. Troy had heroes too. Hector, oldest son of King Priam, commanded the Trojan forces with skill and courage. He was everything a warrior should be: noble, brave, devoted to his family and city. Paris, his brother, was less impressive as a fighter, but had his uses as an archer. Other allies came to Troy's defense. The Lycians, the Mysians, warriors from across Asia Minor, answering King Priam's call. The first 9 years of the war were brutal but indecisive. The Greeks could not breach Troy's walls. The Trojans could not drive the Greeks back to the sea. So the fighting happened on the plain between city and camp, in raids on nearby settlements, in small skirmishes that accomplished little. Men died by the hundreds, then thousands. The war ground on. Achilles fought in many of these engagements. He led raids on allied cities, bringing back plunder and captives. He faced Trojan champions in single combat and defeated them all. His reputation grew until even speaking his name made Trojans pale. He was death on the battlefield, swift and terrible, his spear finding vital spots with uncanny accuracy. Some said his mother had blessed his weapons. Others claimed Apollo guided his strikes. Whatever the truth, Achilles was the most feared warrior in either army.
But he was also growing weary. The war had no end in sight. They were no closer to taking Troy than they had been on day one. The walls stood firm. Hector still commanded the Trojan army. Paris still lived in the city with Helen. Nothing had been accomplished except death piled upon death. Achilles began to question why he was there. Was this the glorious destiny his mother had warned him about? Spending years in a dirty camp, fighting meaningless battles, watching good men die for someone else's grievance? Patroclus sensed his friend's disillusionment, but could offer no comfort. The war was what it was. They had chosen to come. Honor demanded they stay. But privately, Patroclus wondered if they had made a mistake, if glory was worth the price being paid. Then, in the 10th year of the war, everything changed. A priest of Apollo came to the Greek camp seeking his daughter, who had been taken captured. Agamemnon had claimed the priest's daughter, Chryseis, as his own prize. The priest begged for her return, offering ransom, invoking Apollo's name. Agamemnon refused with contempt, driving the old man away with harsh words. Apollo heard his priest's prayers. The god sent plague into the Greek camp. Men began dying, not in battle, but in their tents, burning with fever, coughing blood. The funeral pyres burned day and night. The army was being destroyed from within, and no amount of fighting skill could stop it. Finally, Calchas the prophet revealed the truth. The plague was Apollo's punishment. Chryseis must be returned to her father, or they would all die here, their bones rotting on a foreign shore, their ships abandoned to the elements. Agamemnon had no choice, but he was furious at being forced to give up his prize. And if he had to surrender Chryseis, he decided, someone else would pay the cost. He looked across the gathered warriors, and his gaze fell on Achilles. The young hero was too proud, too independent, too insubordinate. Agamemnon had been looking for an excuse to humble him, and now he had one. "I will return Chryseis," he announced, "but I will not be the only commander to give up his prize. I will take Briseis from Achilles as compensation." The words fell like a thunderclap. Achilles stood slowly, his hand moving to his sword. For a moment, it seemed like he would cut Agamemnon down right there, consequences be damned. Only Athena's intervention stopped him, the goddess appearing to him alone, placing a restraining hand on his shoulder, whispering that patience would serve him better than violence. But if Achilles didn't kill Agamemnon, he made his feelings clear. He called the king a coward, a fraud, a man who hid behind better warriors while claiming their glory. He said Agamemnon was not fit to command dogs, much less heroes. And then he made his vow. He would fight no more for Greece. He and his Myrmidons would stay in their camp. Let Agamemnon fight his own war. Let him see how far he got without Achilles. The heralds came for Briseis. Achilles let them take her without resistance, though his fury was evident. She wept as she was led away, understanding that she was now a pawn in a game played by proud men. Achilles watched her go, then retreated to his tent. He would not eat with the army, would not counsel with the commanders, would not fight alongside them. His mother Thetis heard his prayers and came to him.
She listened to her rage, his sense of betrayal. She agreed that Agamemnon had dishonored him unforgivably. And so she went to Zeus and called in an old favor. The king of gods owed her a debt. She demanded he make the Greeks lose without Achilles, make them suffer, make them beg for her son to return. Only then would Agamemnon understand what he had thrown away. Zeus agreed, though it meant opposing his wife Hera, who supported the Greeks. The king of gods sent a false dream to Agamemnon, making him believe victory was at hand. Agamemnon ordered a massive assault. The Greeks charged toward Troy with confidence, but without Achilles, they were not enough. The Trojans, led by Hector, drove them back. Zeus tilted the battle against the Greeks, and for the first time in 10 years, they faced defeat. Day after day, the Greeks lost ground. Men died in droves. Heroes were wounded. The camp's defensive walls were breached. Trojan forces pushed toward the ships, threatening to burn the fleet and trap the Greeks in a hostile land forever. And through it all, Achilles remained in his tent, refusing to fight, watching his former allies suffer, feeling vindicated, even as part of him wanting to help. This was the beginning of his wrath, the rage that would define him, that would shape the last years of his life and echo through eternity. Achilles had been dishonored, and he would make them all pay. The wrath of Achilles, the quarrel and withdrawal. The Greeks were dying. That was the simple, inescapable truth. Every day brought new losses. Warriors who had survived 9 years of war were cut down because the man who made them nearly invincible was sulking in his tent. Even saying it that way felt unfair, but it was how some saw it. Achilles' absence was a wound the Greek army couldn't staunch. Agamemnon watched his forces crumble, and slowly, painfully, began to understand his mistake. Pride had driven his decision to take Briseis. Pride kept him from immediately apologizing. But pride meant nothing when your entire expedition faced destruction. He tried other tactics first. He sent messengers to Troy proposing truces. He reorganized the battle lines. He gave inspiring speeches. Nothing worked. Without Achilles, they were losing. Agamemnon watched his forces crumble, and slowly, painfully, began to understand his mistake. Pride had driven his decision to take Briseis. Pride kept him from immediately apologizing. But pride meant nothing when your entire expedition faced destruction. He tried other tactics first. He sent messengers to Troy proposing truces. He reorganized the battle lines. He gave inspiring speeches. Nothing worked. Without Achilles, they were losing. The other commanders began pressuring Agamemnon to make amends. Old Nestor, respected for his wisdom, spoke plainly. "You dishonored the best of us. That was foolish. Now you must undo it." Odysseus, always practical, pointed out that no amount of treasure meant anything if they were all dead. Ajax, blunt as always, simply stated, "We need Achilles. Get him back."
Agamemnon finally relented. He would send an embassy to Achilles' tent, offering gifts and apologies. Not just Briseis returned, but lavish compensation. Tripods and gold, horses and women, promises of cities and marriages. The kind of wealth that could make a man forget his grievances. Surely Achilles, however angry, would see reason. They chose the embassy carefully. Odysseus, because he was persuasive. Ajax, because he was respected. Phoenix, an old man who had been like a second father to Achilles in his youth. 3 men who might reach the unyielding warrior. They walked through the camp at twilight, past funeral pyres still burning, past wounded men crying out for water or death. The war's toll was visible everywhere. They found Achilles in his shelter, playing his lyre. Patroclus sat nearby, listening. The music was melancholy, an old song about heroes who died young. Achilles looked up as they entered, unsurprised. He had been expecting this. He welcomed them with the hospitality custom demanded, offering food and wine, treating them as guests rather than as the enemy they represented. Odysseus spoke first, laying out Agamemnon's offer in detail. The gifts were magnificent. The apology, couched in careful language, was as close as a king like Agamemnon could come to admitting he was wrong. Briseis would be returned, Odysseus promised, untouched by Agamemnon's hands. He would swear oaths on it. Moreover, if Troy fell, Achilles could choose treasures before anyone else. And afterward, one of Agamemnon's own daughters would be his bride, bringing with her a dowry of 7 cities. It was a generous offer, more than generous. It was the kind of compensation that ended feuds and began dynasties. Odysseus made the case well, his famous silver tongue working its magic. He painted a picture of Achilles' eventual triumph, his vindication, his eternal fame. All he had to do was come back, fight again, help save Greece. Achilles listened without interruption. When Odysseus finished, there was silence. Then Achilles began to laugh, a bitter, terrible sound. He thinks his gifts can buy me back? He thinks some gold and horses erase dishonor? He set down his lyre. I was born to a prophecy, Odysseus. You know this. My mother told me I could have 2 lives. A long, peaceful one at home, forgotten by history, or a short, glorious one here, remembered forever. I chose glory. I came to this cursed war for glory. He stood, pacing like a caged lion. And what glory have I found? 10 years of pointless fighting, men dying for another man's wife. And then Agamemnon, who has never faced Hector in single combat, who hides behind better warriors, takes my prize and dishonors me in front of the entire army. Now you come offering gifts like I'm some mercenary he can hire? He shook his head. Tell him no.
Tell him I will not fight for him. Tell him I'll sail home tomorrow if I choose. The war can burn for all I care." Ajax tried next, appealing not to glory, but to friendship, to the bonds between warriors. "We are your brothers in arms. We have fought beside you, bled beside you. Now we're dying without you. Does that mean nothing?" His voice was rough with emotion. Ajax was not a man given to speeches, and the effort showed. "Even if you hate Agamemnon, do you hate us too? Let us die because of one man's insult." The words struck closer to home. Achilles' face softened slightly, but he remained firm. "I have been treated as nothing, less than nothing. Until that changes fundamentally, I will not fight." His gaze moved to Phoenix, the old man who had taught him as a child, who had been a father figure when Peleus was far away. "Don't ask this of me, old friend. Don't make me refuse you." Phoenix tried anyway, telling stories of old grudges set aside, of heroes who learned to bend before they broke. He spoke of anger held too long, souring into something toxic. He reminded Achilles of the boy he'd been, of the honor Peleus had tried to instill in him. "Your father would not want you to sit idle while Greeks die. Your mother, for all her love, would not want you to waste the destiny she feared. Come back, not for Agamemnon, but for who you are." But Achilles had made his choice. Not even Phoenix's pleading could move him. "I will reconsider," he said finally, "when Hector is burning the ships, when the war comes to our doorstep. Then maybe I'll think about whether Greece deserves my help, but not before. Take that message to Agamemnon. He'll get no easier terms." The embassy left, carrying Achilles' refusal back to the king. Agamemnon received it in stunned silence. He had been so certain the gifts would work. Every man had his price. But apparently Achilles' price was higher than gold and cities. His price was vindication, and that was something Agamemnon's pride would not let him give. The war continued. The Greeks fought on, stubbornly refusing to retreat even as the Trojans pushed them back toward the ships. Heroes performed incredible feats. Diomedes wounded Ares himself in single combat, with Athena's help. Ajax held the line repeatedly when breakthrough seemed certain. Odysseus led clever raids that delayed defeat. But they were fighting a losing battle. Hector was ascendant. The Trojan prince seemed unstoppable, inspired by Zeus's favor. He cut through Greek lines like a farmer through wheat. Men ran from him. Heroes avoided direct confrontation. Only Ajax could face him without flinching, and even Ajax was gradually worn down. The Trojan assault reached the wooden walls the Greeks had built around their camp, then breached them, then pushed inside. Finally, impossibly, they reached the ships themselves. Hector grabbed a burning brand and approached the nearest vessel, intending to set it ablaze. If the ships burned, the Greeks were finished. They would be trapped in Troy,
unable to retreat, forced to fight to the last man or surrender. Everything balanced on that single moment. And still Achilles did not move. He watched from his tent as smoke began to rise from the camp, heard the screams and clash of battle drawing closer. Patroclus watched too, his face stricken. This was what Achilles had wanted, wasn't it? For them to suffer without him? For Agamemnon to realize his mistake? So why did it feel so wrong? "They're dying," Patroclus said quietly. "Our friends, our comrades, men we fought beside for years. They're dying." "Let them," Achilles said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was angry still, furious at the dishonor, at being treated like a servant rather than a hero. But watching men die to prove a point was different from imagining it. The reality was harder than the fantasy. Patroclus made a decision then. If Achilles would not act, he would. He turned to his friend, his brother, his love. "Then let me go. Give me your armor. Let me lead the Myrmidons into battle. The Trojans fear you. If they see your armor, they'll think you've returned. They'll fall back. I can save the ships." Achilles hesitated. Everything in him screamed no. Patroclus was not invulnerable like he was. Patroclus could be hurt, could be killed. But Patroclus was also right. The ships were burning. If they lost the fleet, everything was lost. And Achilles' pride, however justified, was costing too many lives. "Go," he said finally, the word torn from him. "Take my armor, take the Myrmidons. But Patroclus, listen to me. Drive them from the ships and then come back. Don't pursue them to the walls. Don't try to take Troy yourself. Just save the ships and return. Promise me." Patroclus promised. He donned Achilles' armor, the bronze plate that had been made for a body slightly larger, more powerful. It didn't fit perfectly, but it didn't need to. What mattered was that it was recognizable, that anyone seeing it would think Achilles had returned to battle. The Myrmidons gathered, energized by this development. They had been idle too long, watching their comrades die, prevented by their loyalty to Achilles from helping. Now they had permission to fight. They formed up behind Patroclus, these warriors in their distinctive armor, these men who had followed Achilles from Thessaly. Patroclus led them into battle like a storm breaking over the ocean. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Trojans saw the armor, saw the Myrmidons charging, and believed Achilles had returned. They fell back. Units that had been pushing forward suddenly retreated. The momentum shifted in an instant. Patroclus fought brilliantly, inspired by necessity and the armor he wore. He drove the Trojans away from the ships. He pursued them across the plain. He should have stopped there, should have remembered Achilles' warning. But battle has its own momentum, its own logic. The Greeks were rallying, the Trojans were fleeing. Victory seemed possible, so close he could taste it. He pushed toward Troy's walls, killed a son of Zeus, Sarpedon, in single combat. Apollo himself had to intervene, confused the battlefield, making Patroclus lose his way.
Then the god struck Patroclus from behind, stunning him, making his head ring. The helmet rolled away. The armor became visible, recognizable. Hector saw his chance, saw that this was not Achilles, but someone else wearing the hero's armor. He drove his spear into Patroclus, finding the gap in the armor, piercing flesh and bone. Patroclus fell, the world spinning, blood spreading across the dust. His last thoughts were of Achilles, how he had broken his promise, how he had failed. The Greeks fought to recover Patroclus's body, a desperate struggle over a fallen hero. Menelaus and Ajax led the effort, holding off Hector and his forces long enough to pull Patroclus clear. They carried him back toward the Greek camp, back toward Achilles, bearing terrible news. The message reached Achilles first through a runner. Antilochus, son of Nestor, who ran faster than anyone else, burst into the tent with tears streaming down his face. "Patroclus is dead," he gasped. "Hector killed him. They're bringing back the body." Achilles' world ended in that moment. Everything stopped. His rage at Agamemnon, his pride, his carefully maintained withdrawal from the war, none of it mattered. Patroclus was dead. The one person who understood him, who could gentle his rages, who made life bearable. Gone. Killed while wearing Achilles' own armor. Killed because Achilles had sent him out there. He fell to his knees and screamed. Not a cry of anger, but of pure anguish, a sound that came from somewhere deeper than his lungs. He tore his hair, he covered his face with ash. The captive women in his tent wailed in sympathy, not because they loved Patroclus, but because Achilles' grief was so total, so overwhelming, that it infected everyone who witnessed it. Thetis heard him even in the depths of the sea. She rose from the waves and came to her son, finding him half mad with grief, refusing to be comforted. "He's dead because of me," Achilles kept repeating. "I sent him out there. I let my pride matter more than his safety. He's dead because I wouldn't bend."
His mother held him and wept with him, divine tears for mortal suffering. She knew this was the turning point, the moment when Achilles would return to battle, would kill Hector, and in doing so seal his own fate. The prophecy was coming true. Her son was choosing glory, choosing vengeance, choosing death. "Will you avenge him?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "I will kill Hector," Achilles said, his voice flat, emotionless now that the initial wave of grief had passed. "I will kill every Trojan who stands between me and Hector. I will make them pay in blood for what they took from me." "Then you will die too," Thetis said. "Your fate is bound to Hector's. Kill him, and your own death follows soon after." "I don't care," Achilles said, and meant it. What was life without Patroclus? What was glory if it cost him everything that mattered? He would have vengeance, and then whatever came after, came after. "But I have no armor. Hector took mine from Patroclus's body."
I will get you new armor, Thetis promised, from Hephaestus himself. Armor worthy of the greatest warrior who ever lived. Rest tonight, mourn your friend. Tomorrow you will have the tools for vengeance. She left him there, surrounded by weeping women, sitting beside Patroclus's body, which had been brought back and laid out in the tent. Achilles stayed there all night, refusing food, refusing sleep, just staring at his friend's corpse, memorizing every feature, burning this loss into his memory so he would never forget why he was returning to battle. The war was about to change. Achilles' wrath had been terrible when it was turned away from battle, when it meant Greek losses and Agamemnon's suffering. But that was nothing compared to what was coming, because now his rage had a target. Now it had purpose, and Troy was about to learn why even the gods feared Achilles when he was truly angry. Patroclus, the beloved companion and the turning point. To understand what Patroclus's death meant to Achilles, you have to understand who Patroclus was. Not just a companion or a fellow warrior, but something more essential. Patroclus was the part of Achilles that could still feel compassion, the part that remembered to be human. Without him, Achilles became something else entirely, something more monster than man. They had met as boys, both sent to Chiron for training, but from very different circumstances. Achilles was a king's son, born to glory, marked by prophecy, trained from birth to be the greatest. Patroclus came in shame. He had killed another boy by accident in a quarrel over a game of dice. The death haunted him. He carried guilt like a physical weight, making him gentler, more cautious, more aware of mortality's fragility. On Mount Pelion, they became inseparable. Achilles was drawn to Patroclus's calm, his steadiness, the way he never tried to compete or prove himself. Patroclus was drawn to Achilles' intensity, his passion, the way he attacked life as if every moment mattered. They balanced each other, fire and water, storm and harbor. They trained together, but their approaches differed. Achilles fought to win, always, pushing himself to perfection. Patroclus fought to improve, measuring himself against his own past rather than against others. In combat drills, Achilles was faster, stronger, more skilled. But Patroclus was strategic, thoughtful, the one who could read a battlefield and advise on the best approach. As they grew older, their bond deepened into something the Greeks recognized but didn't always name explicitly. Whether they were lovers in a physical sense, the texts never quite make clear. Some ancient sources suggested they were. Others portrayed them as the ultimate example of platonic friendship. Perhaps the truth contained elements of both. What mattered was that they were devoted to each other in a way that transcended simple categories. Patroclus became Achilles' anchor. When Achilles' rages threatened to consume him, Patroclus could talk him down. When Achilles became too focused on glory and honor, Patroclus reminded him of simple human decency. In the camps at Troy, while other warriors gambled and boasted, Achilles and Patroclus often sat apart. Achilles playing his lyre, Patroclus listening, both content in each other's company. Patroclus was older by a few years, and he took that responsibility seriously. He advised Achilles, though carefully, knowing his friend's pride. He mediated between Achilles and the other commanders. He was well liked in the camp, where Achilles was respected but feared. Soldiers felt comfortable approaching Patroclus with problems, knowing he would listen and, if appropriate, convey their concerns to Achilles. In the field, Patroclus proved himself a capable warrior, not Achilles' equal, but skilled enough to lead men and win battles. He fought with Achilles often, the two moving in concert, each knowing where the other would be, covering each other's weaknesses. They had developed an almost telepathic understanding, born from years of practice and deep trust. Patroclus was older by a few years, and he took that responsibility seriously. He advised Achilles, though carefully, knowing his friend's pride. He mediated between Achilles and the other commanders. He was well liked in the camp, where Achilles was respected but feared. Soldiers felt comfortable approaching Patroclus with problems, knowing he would listen and, if appropriate, convey their concerns to Achilles. In the field, Patroclus proved himself a capable warrior, not Achilles' equal, but skilled enough to lead men and win battles. He fought with Achilles often, the two moving in concert, each knowing where the other would be, covering each other's weaknesses. They had developed an almost telepathic understanding, born from years of practice and deep trust. Patroclus was older by a few years, and he took that responsibility seriously. He advised Achilles, though carefully, knowing his friend's pride. He mediated between Achilles and the other commanders. He was well liked in the camp, where Achilles was respected but feared. Soldiers felt comfortable approaching Patroclus with problems, knowing he would listen and, if appropriate, convey their concerns to Achilles. In the field, Patroclus proved himself a capable warrior, not Achilles' equal, but skilled enough to lead men and win battles. He fought with Achilles often, the two moving in concert, each knowing where the other would be, covering each other's weaknesses. They had developed an almost telepathic understanding, born from years of practice and deep trust. Patroclus was older by a few years, and he took that responsibility seriously. He advised Achilles, though carefully, knowing his friend's pride. He mediated between Achilles and the other commanders. He was well liked in the camp, where Achilles was respected but feared. Soldiers felt comfortable approaching Patroclus with problems, knowing he would listen and, if appropriate, convey their concerns to Achilles. In the field, Patroclus proved himself a capable warrior, not Achilles' equal, but skilled.
Achilles agreed, but with the warning: drive them back, then return. Don't pursue. Don't try to be a hero. Patroclus heard the fear in his friend's voice. Achilles, who feared nothing, was afraid for him. He promised, he swore, he meant it. But battle changes things. In the moment, with Greeks rallying around him, with Trojans fleeing, with victory suddenly possible, the promise became harder to keep. Patroclus pushed forward. He told himself it was necessary, that every step pressed the advantage, that stopping too soon would waste the momentum. But part of him also wanted to prove something, to show that he could be a hero too, not just Achilles' shadow. He killed Sarpedon, Zeus's son, in single combat. It should have been his greatest triumph. Instead, it marked the beginning of the end. Apollo had been protecting Sarpedon. The god was furious. He began working against Patroclus, clouding his judgment, misdirecting his steps, weakening him in subtle ways. Patroclus pressed toward Troy's walls. He should have turned back, but he was caught in the momentum, in the rush of battle, in the belief that just a little further, just one more push would break the Trojans entirely. 3 times he reached the walls and tried to scale them. 3 times Apollo appeared and threw him back, though no one else saw the god. Then Apollo struck him from behind, a blow that rattled his skull and made the world spin. The helmet fell off. The armor became vulnerable. Patroclus stood there, stunned, defenseless. And Euphorbos, a Trojan warrior, drove a spear into his back. Not deep enough to kill, but enough to wound, to slow him down. Hector saw his chance. He faced this wounded warrior in Achilles' armor and realized it wasn't Achilles at all. The fighting style was wrong, the vulnerabilities too obvious. He drove his spear forward with all his strength, and the bronze tip found flesh, went deep, found vital organs. Patroclus fell. He knew immediately that the wound was mortal. There would be no healing, no miracle. He had moments, maybe minutes. He looked up at Hector, who stood over him, and managed to speak. "You glory in this kill, but it was the gods who defeated me. Euphorbos struck me second, you only third. And know this, Hector, you won't live long. Achilles will avenge me. Your death is already written." They were prophetic words, truer than Hector knew. But in that moment, Hector ignored them, caught up in his victory. He had killed the man in Achilles' armor, had struck a blow against the Greeks' greatest champion. The armor became his prize. He stripped it from Patroclus's body, donning it himself, wearing the armor that had been made for Achilles. The Greeks fought desperately to recover Patroclus's body. A battle within a battle raged over his corpse. Hector tried to drag it away, to desecrate it, to feed it to the dogs, as Patroclus had helped do to so many Trojans. But Menelaus and Ajax held him off, eventually driving the Trojans back and securing the body. They carried Patroclus back to camp, this beloved friend, this fallen warrior. The Myrmidons wept openly. Other soldiers who had known him added their mourning. But none of it compared to what happened when the news reached Achilles. Antilochus delivered the message, tears streaming down his young face. And Achilles, who had been expecting triumph, expecting news that Patroclus had saved the day and driven the Trojans back, instead heard the words that shattered his world. Patroclus is dead. The body is coming. The scream that tore from Achilles was not human. It was the sound of something breaking, of a soul being torn in half. He collapsed. He grabbed handfuls of ash and dirt and poured them over his head in the traditional gesture of mourning. But there was nothing traditional about the scale of his grief. This was not a warrior mourning a comrade. This was a man losing the only thing that made life worth living. His captive women wailed with him.
They had their own griefs, their own lost homes and families. But Achilles' anguish was so total that it gave them permission to release their own sorrows. The tent became a place of shared mourning, of collective recognition that war cost more than could ever be repaid. But battle changes things. In the moment, with Greeks rallying around him, with Trojans fleeing, with victory suddenly possible, the promise became harder to keep. Patroclus pushed forward. He told himself it was necessary, that every step pressed the advantage, that stopping too soon would waste the momentum. But part of him also wanted to prove something, to show that he could be a hero too, not just Achilles' shadow. He killed Sarpedon, Zeus's son, in single combat. It should have been his greatest triumph. Instead, it marked the beginning of the end. Apollo had been protecting Sarpedon. The god was furious. He began working against Patroclus, clouding his judgment, misdirecting his steps, weakening him in subtle ways. Patroclus pressed toward Troy's walls. He should have turned back. But he was caught in the momentum, in the rush of battle, in the belief that just a little further, just one more push would break the Trojans entirely. 3 times he reached the walls and tried to scale them. 3 times Apollo appeared and threw him back, though no one else saw the god. Then Apollo struck him from behind, a blow that rattled his skull and made the world spin. The helmet fell off. The armor became vulnerable. Patroclus stood there, stunned, defenseless. And Euphorbos, a Trojan warrior, drove a spear into his back. Not deep enough to kill, but enough to wound, to slow him down. Hector saw his chance. He faced this wounded warrior in Achilles' armor and realized it wasn't Achilles at all. The fighting style was wrong, the vulnerabilities too obvious. He drove his spear forward with all his strength, and the bronze tip found flesh, went deep, found vital organs. Patroclus fell. He knew immediately that the wound was mortal. There would be no healing, no miracle. He had moments, maybe minutes. He looked up at Hector, who stood over him, and managed to speak. "You glory in this kill, but it was the gods who defeated me. Euphorbos struck me second, you only third. And know this, Hector, you won't live long. Achilles will avenge me. Your death is already written." They were prophetic words, truer than Hector knew. But in that moment, Hector ignored them, caught up in his victory. He had killed the man in Achilles' armor, had struck a blow against the Greeks' greatest champion. The armor became his prize. He stripped it from Patroclus' body, donning it himself, wearing the armor that had been made for Achilles. The Greeks fought desperately to recover Patroclus' body. A battle within a battle raged over his corpse. Hector tried to drag it away, to desecrate it, to feed it to the dogs, as Patroclus had helped do to so many Trojans. But Menelaus and Ajax held him off, eventually driving the Trojans back and securing the body. They carried Patroclus back to camp, this beloved friend, this fallen warrior. The Myrmidons wept openly. Other soldiers who had known him added their mourning. But none of it compared to what happened when the news reached Achilles. Antilochus delivered the message, tears streaming down his young face. And Achilles, who had been expecting triumph, expecting news that Patroclus had saved the day and driven the Trojans back, instead heard the words that
Achilles accepted the armor with grim satisfaction. It was beautiful, but he looked at it only as a tool, a means to an end, a way to kill Hector. He donned it at dawn, each piece clicking into place, the bronze fitting him perfectly. When he emerged from his tent in full armor, the gathered Greeks gasped. He looked like a god, like death incarnate. The armor caught the rising sun and blazed like fire. He called for an assembly. The entire Greek army gathered, thousands of men, to hear what Achilles would say. Agamemnon stood before them, finally ready to make his apology public. He blamed divine madness, for his actions, said the gods had clouded his judgment, offered the gifts again, all of them, before witnesses. Achilles cut him off. "Keep your gifts or give them. I don't care. I want only one thing, to kill the man who killed Patroclus. Then this war can end however it ends. Let Hector die, and my part is finished." He turned to the army. "We fight today. We fight until Hector falls. Anyone who wants to stand with me, form up. Anyone who doesn't, stay in camp. But I'm going to war, with you or without you." Every man present stood, even those who had doubted Achilles, who had resented his withdrawal, who had suffered because of his absence. They stood because they recognized what he had become. No longer the proud but petulant hero who had sulked in his tent. Now he was something purer and more terrible. He was vengeance made flesh. And every Trojan on that field was about to understand what happened when you made Achilles truly angry. Return to battle, divine armor, and sacred wrath. The armor Hephaestus created was not meant for mortal hands. Every piece was infused with divine craft, metals that no human smith could work, joined with techniques that belonged to the realm of gods. The breastplate alone took the smith all night, hammering with tools that never dulled, tempering in fires that never cooled, shaping bronze and gold and silver into something that would protect the greatest warrior who ever lived. The shield was the centerpiece, so magnificent that descriptions of it would fill entire passages of poetry. Hephaestus had wrought upon its surface the whole world as he understood it. At the center, the earth and sky and sea, the sun that tires not, and the full moon, and all the constellations that crown the heavens. Then, ringed around these, 2 cities. One city was at peace, with wedding processions and feasts, with music and dancing, with people gathered in the marketplace, settling disputes through law and reason. The other city was besieged, surrounded by armies, with warriors preparing for battle and the women waiting on the walls. He showed farmers plowing fields, their oxen straining against the yoke. He showed vineyards heavy with grapes, and herdsmen tending cattle. He showed the ocean at the very rim, great Oceanus that was said to encircle the world. It was meant to remind whoever bore it of what they fought to protect, the ordinary beauty of human life.
the value of peace, even in times of war. But when Achilles looked at the shield, he saw only its defensive properties. How much punishment could it take? How many blows could it turn aside? The deeper meaning was lost on him, or perhaps he chose to ignore it. The rest of the armor was equally magnificent. Greaves for his legs, fitted so precisely they seemed part of his skin. A breastplate that covered his torso, light enough to allow movement, but strong enough to turn any blade. A helmet with a plume of horsehair that dyed crimson, nodding terribly as he moved. When the sun struck it, the whole ensemble blazed like fire. Achilles strapped on each piece methodically, ritually, transforming himself from grieving man to instrument of death. His mother watched, knowing this was the last time she would see him prepare for battle. After today, events would move too quickly. Fate would have its way. Her son would kill Hector, and then his own death would follow, swift and inevitable. "Fight well," she said simply, knowing there were no words that could change what was coming. "Honor Patroclus, but remember, you are still mortal. The armor protects your body, but not your fate." Achilles barely heard her. His mind was already on the battlefield, already planning how he would cut through Trojans until he found Hector. Nothing else mattered. Agamemnon's apology, Briseis returned, the gifts offered, all of it was backdrop to the only thing that had meaning: vengeance for Patroclus. He reconciled with Agamemnon publicly, more to avoid further delay than out of genuine forgiveness. The king made his apology formal, swearing oaths that he had never touched Briseis, that the insult was rescinded, that Achilles stood honored before all Greeks. He presented the gifts. Briseis was brought forward, weeping to see Patroclus laid out in state, weeping for the man who had always treated her with kindness. Achilles acknowledged all of this with curt nods. Then he dismissed the assembly and prepared for battle. The Myrmidons rallied around him, these elite warriors who had watched Patroclus die while they remained inactive, who burned with their own need for vengeance. They armed themselves, silently, efficiently, each man checking his gear, testing weapons, preparing for what would be a day unlike any other. Achilles called his horses. Xanthus and Balius were their names, immortal horses gifted to Pallas by the gods, descended from the west wind himself. They were magnificent creatures, faster than mortal steeds, intelligent beyond normal animals. Achilles spoke to them, commanded them to bring him back alive today, unlike how they had failed to bring back Patroclus.
Then something unprecedented happened. Hera briefly gave Xanthus the power of speech. The horse turned its head to look at Achilles with two knowing eyes and spoke in a voice like wind through trees. "We will save you today, mighty Achilles. We will run swifter than any wind. But your death is near, not by our failure, but by a god and a mortal man working together. You know this. Your mother has told you, yet still you fight." Achilles cut him off. "I know my fate. I don't need horses, however divine, to remind me. Run, that's all I ask. Run faster than you've ever run, and bring me to Hector." The horse said nothing more, having delivered its warning, and the Furies silenced it, not wanting the mortal world too aware of divine plans. The Greek army marched out in mass, Achilles at their head. The Trojans saw them coming and initially prepared to meet them on the plain as they had for 10 years. But when word spread that Achilles was back, that he wore new divine armor and was seeking Hector specifically, fear began to spread. Men who had fought Achilles before and survived knew what was coming. They warned their comrades. This was not the same as facing the Greeks without Achilles. This was going to be a slaughter. Hector, wearing Achilles' old armor taken from Patroclus, heard the reports and felt the first touch of doubt. He had killed Patroclus, had claimed the armor as a prize. It had seemed like victory at the time. Now, facing Achilles' wrath, it seemed like folly. His father, old King Priam, begged him not to face Achilles alone. His mother, Hecuba, pleaded for him to stay behind the walls. His wife, Andromache, wept and held their infant son, begging him not to leave them. But Hector was Troy's champion. If he hid while his men faced Achilles, what did that say about Troy's courage? He would fight. He would defend his city. And perhaps, wearing Achilles' old armor, he would have some protection, some advantage. He ordered the Trojan army to stand firm and meet the Greeks. The battle began at dawn, and by noon the plain was painted red. Achilles fought like no human had ever fought. He was everywhere at once, his spear finding target after target, his sword cutting down any Trojan foolish enough to engage him. He took no prisoners, showed no mercy. When warriors tried to ransom themselves, offering gold and safe conduct, he killed them anyway. When they begged for their lives, he ignored their pleas. He was fulfilling a vow he'd made over Patroclus's body. He would sacrifice 12 Trojan princes on his friend's funeral pyre. He captured them alive specifically for that purpose, binding them and sending them back to camp to await execution. It was barbaric even by the standards of ancient warfare, but Achilles was beyond caring about conventions. The river Scamander ran red with blood, literally. So many bodies were thrown into it, so much blood flowed into its waters, that the river itself became angry. The river god, who had always remained neutral in the war, rose up against Achilles. The waters surged, trying to drown him, trying to sweep him away. Achilles fought against the river itself, struggling to stay upright as the current tried to pull him under. Only divine intervention saved him. Hephaestus sent fire to counter the water, heating the stream until it boiled, until the river god cried out for mercy and retreated. It was a battle that transcended normal warfare, gods fighting alongside and against mortals, the natural world itself participating in the combat. And through it all, Achilles kept fighting, kept advancing, kept seeking Hector. The Trojans broke. There was no other word for it. They ran for the city gates, abandoning the field, leaving their wounded and dead behind.
The gates opened to receive them, and the Trojans flooded through, desperate for safety. But Achilles was right behind them, cutting down stragglers, his rage undiminished. Hector should have run with them. Every instinct screamed at him to retreat behind those massive walls, to live to fight another day. But he saw his people fleeing in terror. He saw Achilles pursuing them. And he made a decision that was either the bravest or most foolish of his life. He would stay. He would face Achilles alone. He would end this one way or another. His parents screamed from the walls, begging him to come inside. Andromache appeared, still holding their son, her screams of fear and grief audible even over the din of battle. But Hector stood his ground outside the Scaean gate, the massive entrance to Troy, and waited for Achilles to reach him. When Achilles saw Hector waiting, he slowed. He had cut through an army to reach this moment. Now it was here, just the two of them. The greatest Greek warrior and Troy's finest champion. This was how it should end. This was fitting.
Except it wasn't going to be a fair fight. It had never been a fair fight. Achilles was more than human, trained by Chiron, nearly invulnerable, blessed by gods, wearing armor forged by Hephaestus himself. Hector was merely the best of mortal men, wearing armor that had already failed to protect its previous owner. The outcome was never in doubt. But Hector stood his ground, and in that moment he achieved something greater than victory could have given him. He showed Troy what courage looked like. He showed them that even facing certain death, a man could stand firm. That was worth something, perhaps everything. Achilles approached, his armor blazing in the sun, his eyes locked on Hector with such intensity that it seemed like the rest of the world had ceased to exist. This was what he had been made for. This moment. This kill. Vengeance for Patroclus. Nothing else mattered. Not the war, not Troy, not his own impending death. Just this. Just Hector falling beneath his spear. "You're going to die now," Achilles called out, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. "You're going to die for Patroclus, for every Greek you've killed, for every tear shed because of you. I'm going to kill you, and then I'm going to desecrate your body. The dogs will feast on you. The birds will tear your flesh. And your father will watch from the walls, unable to do anything about it." Hector raised his spear in response. He had hoped to bargain, to propose terms. Winner takes armor, but returns the body for proper burial. Civilization had rules, even in war. But looking at Achilles, at the inhuman fury in his eyes, Hector understood that civilization had left the field. This was something older, more primal. This was pure rage, given form. The duel began, and Troy held its breath, watching from the walls as its greatest champion faced its destroyer. The outcome would shape everything that came after. But the ending had already been written by the fates. Hector was going to die. Achilles was going to kill him. And with that death,
The last real hope for Troy would die too. The death of Hector, 3 times around the walls. For a moment, Hector and Achilles simply stood facing each other. The entire war seemed to pause around them. On Troy's walls, thousands watched. Priam gripped the stone so hard his ancient hands bled. Hecuba wept openly. Andromache held their son Astyanax close, whispering prayers to any god who might listen. In the Greek camp, those who had remained behind climbed to vantage points to witness this final confrontation. Hector spoke first, trying one last time for reason. "Let us make a pact, you and I. If I kill you, I will honor your body and return it to the Greeks for proper funeral rites. Swear you will do the same if you kill me? This is the civilized way. This is how heroes should act." Achilles laughed, but there was no humor in it. Lions don't make pacts with men. Wolves don't swear oaths to lambs. There are no pacts between you and me. You killed Patroclus. For that, you die. Your body will be food for dogs and birds. Your father will watch you be desecrated. This is what you deserve. Hector felt his last hope die. He had known deep down that there would be no mercy here, but he had hoped. Now that hope was gone, replaced by the cold certainty of his approaching death. If he could not win, he would at least die fighting. Better that than cowering. He drew back his spear and threw, aiming for the throat gap in Achilles' armor. It was a perfect throw, the kind that had killed many Greeks before. But Athena, who had always favored the Greek cause, was watching. She breathed upon the spear in flight, just enough to alter its course. The spear struck Achilles' shield dead center and bounced off harmlessly. Hector stared in disbelief. It should have hit. He threw again with his second spear. Same result. The goddess protected her favorite. Meanwhile, Achilles advanced, testing his own spear's weight, choosing his moment. He studied Hector's armor, his old armor that Hector had taken from Patroclus's body. He knew that armor, knew every gap in it, knew exactly where it was vulnerable. Then something changed in Hector's eyes. Achilles saw it. Fear. Real, genuine, primal terror. Because Hector suddenly understood that he could not win this, could not even hurt Achilles. The gap in capability was too wide. He had fought Greeks for 10 years, killed many of their finest. But Achilles was different. Achilles was a force of nature, and nature could not be fought. Hector ran, not tactically, not in planned retreat, but in pure panic. He turned and fled along the walls of Troy, and Achilles pursued. They ran, and the watching armies gasped. It seemed impossible. These were heroes, champions, men who were supposed to face death with dignity. Yet here was Hector fleeing and Achilles chasing, both moving at speeds that should have been impossible, circling the massive walls of Troy. Once around the city they ran. The walls of Troy were enormous, and the distance was considerable. But both men were in peak condition, trained from youth, driven by adrenaline and fate. Hector ran for his life. Achilles ran for vengeance. neither slowed. Twice around, the Greeks watching began to cheer, not in celebration, but in amazement. This was unprecedented. This was already legendary, even as it happened. The Trojans wept and wailed, seeing their champion reduced to fleeing prey, unable to stop watching, even as it broke their hearts.
3 times they circled those ancient walls, past springs where Trojan women had once washed clothes in peacetime, past gates that had stood for generations, past towers built by gods. The whole city became their arena, and every eye followed their terrible race. Zeus watched from Olympus, holding his scales of fate. One pan held Hector's destiny, the other Achilles' death. The scales tipped. Hector's pan fell, sinking toward the underworld. His fate was sealed. Apollo, who had protected Hector through the war, sadly withdrew his support. The god could not prevent what the fates had decreed. On the 4th pass, Hector's courage returned. Or perhaps it was simply that he could run no more, that death chasing was worse than death faced. He stopped, turned, raised his weapons. "I will run no more," he gasped, breathing hard. "Let us fight now. One of us will die here, and let that be the end of it." But Athena had one more trick. She appeared to Hector in the form of Deiphobus, his brother. "I've brought you a spear," she said, seeming to offer him a weapon. "Fight with me beside you. Together we can take him." Hector's heart leaped with hope. If Deiphobus was here, if his brother would fight alongside him, they had a chance. 2 against 1, even if the one was Achilles. "Stand with me, brother," he said, drawing strength from the apparent presence of his sibling. Then he faced Achilles again, drew back his spear, and threw with all his remaining strength. Again it struck the shield Hephaestus had made. Again it bounced off harmlessly. Hector turned to call for Deiphobus to give him another spear. But Deiphobus was gone. There was no one there, just empty air where his brother had seemed to stand. Hector understood immediately. The gods had deceived him. Athena had tricked him into thinking he had support, had given him false hope just to make the reality more crushing. He was alone. He had always been alone in this. He drew his sword, the only weapon he had left. "So this is how it ends," he said, more to himself than to Achilles. "Tricked by gods, abandoned by fate. Very well. I will die with honor at least. I will not beg. I will not cower. Come then, Greek, finish it." He charged, sword raised, knowing it was futile, but refusing to die passive. It was a brave man's last act, hopeless but defiant. Achilles sidestepped easily, his spear already in motion. The bronze tip found the gap in the armor right at the collarbone. The weak point Achilles had known was there. It punched through flesh and windpipe, not quite severing the vocal cords, leaving Hector able to speak, but clearly dying. Hector fell, and Achilles stood over him, spear still embedded in his enemy's throat.
You thought you could kill Patroclus and not face consequences? Achilles said, his voice still hot with rage. You thought you could take my armor as a prize? Now you pay for that arrogance. Hector coughed blood, struggling to speak through his ruined throat. You've won, but your own death follows close. Paris and Apollo will kill you at the Scaean gate. Enjoy your victory. It won't last. Even dying, Hector managed to deliver prophecy, to remind his killer that this victory was temporary, that fate was not done with Achilles either. The words struck home, but Achilles pushed them aside. Prophecies can wait. First, I'm going to drag your corpse through the mud. I'm going to feed you to the dogs. Your body will be dishonored before all Troy. Please, Hector managed, his pride finally breaking as death approached. My father will pay. Ransom, gold, bronze, whatever you want. Just return my body for burial. Don't leave me for scavengers. I beg you. Dogs, Achilles repeated, pulling his spear free. You'll be eaten by dogs. Not even that. I'll feed you to the Greeks' dogs. Your father will watch. Your wife will watch. All Troy will see what happens to those who kill someone I love. Hector died then, his breath rattling out, his eyes fixed on the walls of Troy, where his family watched. His last thought was of home, of the city he died trying to protect. His last thought was probably of Andromache and his son, and whether his death would save them or doom them. Achilles felt no satisfaction in the kill. He'd expected vindication, relief, some sense that justice had been served. Instead, there was just emptiness. Patroclus was still dead. Hector's death didn't bring him back. The rage was still there, unsatisfied, turning on itself. He did what he'd promised. He stripped Hector's body of armor, leaving him naked in death. Then he did something that shocked even the Greeks who supported him. He pierced Hector's ankles and threaded them with leather straps. He tied those straps to his chariot, and then he dragged Hector's body back toward the Greek camp, behind his chariot, through the dust and rocks of the plain. On the walls, the Trojans wailed. Priam collapsed, had to be supported by guards. Hecuba tore her hair and her robes, screaming curses at Achilles, at the gods, at fate itself. Andromache fainted dead away when she saw what was happening to her husband's corpse. The whole city descended into mourning, even though the war wasn't over, even though Troy still stood. The Greeks watched Achilles return with mixed emotions. Yes, he'd avenged Patroclus. Yes, he'd killed Troy's champion. But the desecration of the body troubled even hardened warriors. There were rules, customs. You could kill an enemy honorably and still treat his body with respect. What Achilles was doing crossed lines that shouldn't be crossed. But no one spoke against him, not now, not while his rage was still burning. They watched him circle Patroclus's body 3 times, dragging Hector's corpse around it, as if the sight would somehow comfort his dead friend. Then he finally stopped, left Hector's battered body lying in the dirt, and went into his tent. Apollo and Aphrodite, watching from Olympus, took pity on Hector. They protected his body from further damage, kept it from decomposing, kept the dogs away. Despite Achilles' abuse, despite being dragged through dirt and rocks, Hector's corpse remained intact, unblemished, as if in death the gods granted him a dignity he'd been denied in life. For 11 days, Achilles kept Hector's body. Every morning he would drag it around Patroclus' tomb again, venting rage that never seemed to diminish. The Greeks held funeral games for Patroclus, elaborate competitions in his honor, chariot races, wrestling, archery, all the ways warriors proved themselves. Achilles organized it all, gave out rich prizes, honored his friend in every way he could. But it wasn't enough. Nothing was enough. Patroclus was still gone. And Achilles was beginning to understand, in some deep part of himself, that no amount of vengeance would bring him back, that he had traded everything for revenge that satisfied nothing. The gods themselves were disturbed. On the 12th day after Hector's death, they met in council on Olympus. Apollo argued for forcing Achilles to return the body. Hera countered that Achilles had earned the right to do as he pleased with his enemy's corpse. Zeus, trying to balance competing interests, came up with a compromise. He sent Thetis to her son with a direct command: return Hector's body to Priam for ransom. This was not a request, but an order from the king of gods. Even in his grief, Achilles could not refuse Zeus. Meanwhile, Zeus sent Iris to Priam with instructions. Take ransom to Achilles. Go personally, at night, and retrieve your son's body. Priam prepared to go, loading a wagon with treasure, despite his family's objections. They feared Achilles would kill the old king out of spite. But Priam was beyond fear. He had watched his son die, and then watched his body be desecrated for 11 days. What more could Achilles do to him? He would go. He would beg if necessary. He would do whatever it took to give Hector a proper burial. Zeus sent Hermes, messenger of the gods, to guide Priam safely through the Greek camp. In the middle of the night, an old king and his driver, escorted by a god in disguise, made their way toward Achilles' tent, toward a meeting that would be remembered as one of the most powerful moments in all of ancient literature, a moment of shared humanity in the midst of inhuman war. Priam's plea, a moment of humanity. Night had fallen over the Greek camp when Priam arrived. The old king had dressed simply, without crown or royal regalia. He wanted Achilles to see him not as a king, but as a father. The wagon behind him groaned under the weight of ransom. Gold and bronze, elaborate tapestries, fine armor, precious metals, and more. A king's treasure for a son's body. Hermes guided them through the camp with divine efficiency. Sentries who should have challenged them instead found their eyes drawn elsewhere. Guards who should have raised alarms were suddenly struck with convenient drowsiness. The god made sure Priam reached Achilles' tent undetected, unseen. Then Hermes revealed himself briefly, gave the old king encouragement, and vanished, leaving Priam alone before the tent where his son's killer dwelt. Inside, Achilles sat with Patroclus' urn, the remains of his friend that he had carefully collected after the funeral pyre. He had just finished his evening meal, but took no pleasure in food. Every bite felt like betrayal. Patroclus would never eat again. Why should he? He was contemplating dragging Hector's body around the tomb again tomorrow, a daily routine that had become routine, when he heard footsteps. Priam entered without announcing himself. In the dim light of oil lamps, he looked smaller than his reputation suggested. Just an old man, stooped with age and grief, wearing the marks of 12 days of mourning. His face was haggard, his eyes red from weeping, his hands trembling as he approached Achilles. Before Achilles could react, before his guards could stop him, Priam did something extraordinary. He fell to his knees before Achilles and grabbed his hands, the same hands that had killed his son. He brought those hands to his lips and kissed them. It was the ultimate act of supplication, a king degrading himself before a younger man, begging for mercy from his son's murderer. "Remember your own father," Priam began, his voice cracking but determined. "Pallas, who waits for you in Phthia. He is old, like me. Perhaps he faces enemies without you there to protect him. But at least he has hope. He can still dream that one day you'll return home, that he'll see his son again before he dies. I had that hope too, for many sons. 50 sons I fathered, Paris, Hector, and 48 others. Most are dead now, killed in this war. But Hector was the best of them, the bravest, the noblest. He defended our city when others would have fled. And now he's dead, killed by your hand."
Achilles sat frozen, unable to pull away, unable to respond. No one had spoken to him this way. No one had dared approach him with such raw, unguarded emotion. The old man's grief was palpable, filling the tent like smoke. "I have done what no man has done," Priam continued. "I have kissed the hands of the man who killed my son. I have lowered myself to beg from his killer. I bring ransom, all that you see in the wagon outside. Gold and bronze beyond measure. Take it all. Take twice that amount. Just give me back my son's body. Let me bury him properly. Let his wife say goodbye. Let his son see him one last time. Let Troy mourn him as he deserves. I beg this of you, Achilles. I beg this not as a king, but as a father. Have mercy on an old man who has lost everything." The words struck something in Achilles that his armor couldn't protect. The reference to Peleus especially cut deep. His own father, who Achilles knew he would never see again, who was even now waiting for a son who would not return, who would die not knowing what became of Achilles, who would learn eventually that his son died young in a foreign war, just as prophecy had foretold. Tears began running down Achilles' face. Not tears of rage this time, but something more complex. Grief for Patroclus, yes,
but also for his own approaching death, for his father's eventual loss, for the whole tragic waste of this war. He looked at Priam and saw not an enemy, but a mirror of his own father's future suffering. "Get up, old man," he said gently, helping Priam to his feet. "Sit. We should not grovel, neither of us. The gods have spun a cruel fate for mortals. We suffer while they feast without care on Olympus. Some men get lives of pure misery. Some get mixed portions of joy and sorrow. What has your life been?" They sat together, killer and victim's father, and for a moment the war didn't exist. They were just two men contemplating the nature of suffering, the weight of fate, the brevity of human life compared to divine eternity. Achilles found himself talking, really talking, for the first time since Patroclus died. "Your son died bravely," Achilles said. "He stood when others ran. He fought when he could have hidden behind walls. Even at the end, when he knew he couldn't win, he faced me. That takes courage. I respected him as I killed him, if that brings any comfort." "Small comfort," Priam said honestly, "but some. Will you return his body?" "Yes." The word came easier than Achilles expected. The rage that had driven him for 11 days was guttering out, replaced by exhaustion and a strange sense of kinship with this grieving old man. "I'll return him, washed and prepared properly. You can take him back to Troy for burial." Priam's relief was visible, tears flowing again, but this time from gratitude rather than despair. "The ransom—" "Keep your gold," Achilles said, though he knew he wouldn't truly refuse it. Custom demanded ransom be paid, and to refuse might insult Priam further. Or rather, take the amount appropriate for a prince and leave the rest. I don't need Troy's treasure. I have enough." He called for his servants, gave orders to prepare Hector's body properly, to wash away the dirt, to anoint it with oils, to dress it in fine robes. While the servants worked, Achilles and Priam continued talking. They spoke of sons and fathers, of war's futility, of the strange dance of fate that had brought them to this moment. They shared wine. They broke bread together, an old ritual of temporary truce. For that night, Achilles was not the Greeks' champion, and Priam was not Troy's king. They were just two men who had lost people they loved to this endless war. Achilles even offered advice. "When you leave tomorrow, leave early, and I'll grant you 12 days of truce. Time for Hector's funeral, time for Troy to mourn properly. After that, the war continues. But you'll have those days at least." 12 days, Priam repeated, calculating how much could be done in that time. Gathering wood for the funeral pyre would take days alone. "Thank you. This is more than I hoped for. You have shown honor tonight, Achilles, despite everything." "Don't mistake exhaustion for honor," Achilles said tiredly. "I'm tired, old man. Tired of rage, tired of killing, tired of this war. The gods gave you mercy tonight because I lack the energy for cruelty. Tomorrow I may feel differently. Then I'm grateful for tonight, Priam said simply. They bedded down in different parts of the tent, Priam on a cot that Achilles provided, both sleeping more soundly than either had in days. In the morning, before the camp woke, Priam loaded Hector's body onto his wagon. The corpse was pristine, untouched by decay, despite the abuse it had suffered. The gods had protected it, making sure Hector looked peaceful in death, almost asleep. Achilles walked him to the edge of camp. They said no goodbyes. What would be the point? They were still enemies. In 13 days, they might face each other again in battle, though both sensed that wouldn't happen. Their story together was done. They had shared one night of humanity in an inhuman war. That would have to be enough.
Priam drove the wagon back to Troy as the sun rose. The guards on the walls saw him coming and opened the gates. The wagon rolled through, and Priam went straight to his palace, calling for the royal family, calling for the city's mourners, announcing that Hector had come home at last. Andromache was the first to reach the wagon. She pulled back the cloth covering her husband's body and collapsed across him, weeping without restraint. "You promised you'd come back," she sobbed. "You promised you wouldn't leave me alone. What will happen to me now? What will happen to our son? Without you to protect us, what does the future hold?" She was right to worry. When Troy fell, as it inevitably would, Astyanax would be thrown from the walls by the Greeks, too dangerous to leave alive as Hector's son. Andromache herself would be taken as a slave, passed from one Greek warrior to another, living in servitude. But that was in the future. For now she had her husband's body, and that was everything. For 12 days Troy mourned. They built an enormous pyre, gathering wood from the surrounding forests. They dressed Hector in his finest armor, the armor he should have worn in life but had been denied in death. They held competitions in his honor. They sacrificed animals. They sang laments. Hecuba led the mourning women in their wailing. Priam delivered a eulogy for his son, praising his courage, his devotion to family, his defense of Troy. Paris spoke too, guilt evident in every word, knowing his actions had started this war, knowing his brother had died protecting him and Helen. Helen herself mourned genuinely, knowing Hector had been one of the few Trojans who treated her kindly despite the war she'd caused. On the 12th day, they burned the pyre. The flames reached toward the sky, carrying Hector's spirit to whatever afterlife awaited heroes. They collected his bones and ashes, placed them in a golden urn, and buried the urn beneath a great mound that could be seen for miles. The war did not end with Hector's death, but Troy's hope did. Everyone knew now that the city was doomed. Without Hector, their best defender was gone. Without him, the Trojans couldn't hold the Greeks forever. It was just a matter of time. The siege would continue, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. In the Greek camp, Achilles returned to his routine, but something had changed. The rage that had defined him since Patroclus's death had burned out. What remained was a kind of resignation. He had killed Hector. He had avenged his friend.
and he felt nothing. No satisfaction, no peace. Just emptiness and the certain knowledge that his own death was approaching. He thought often of that night with Priam, of how easy it had been to show mercy once the immediate fury faded, of how much they had in common, hero and old king, despite being on opposite sides. He wondered if that moment represented who he actually was beneath the armor and reputation. But it was too late to matter now. The prophecies were aligning. Hector had predicted Achilles' death. Thetis had warned it would follow soon after Hector's killing. Achilles felt time running out, felt fate's noose tightening. But oddly, he wasn't afraid. After everything he'd been through, death seemed almost like rest, like rejoining Patroclus, like finally being done with this cursed war. He didn't have long to wait. The final battles and the death of Achilles. The war continued into its final year, though everyone knew the end was near. Hector's death had broken something in Troy's defense. The Trojans still fought, still defended their walls, but the belief that they might actually win was gone. They fought now not for victory, but for survival, for delay, hoping something might change, even though they knew it wouldn't. More allies arrived to help Troy, drawn by desperation and old debts. First came the Amazons, that legendary tribe of warrior women from the eastern lands. They were led by their queen, Penthesilea, who came seeking glory and battle against the greatest Greek warrior. She arrived with a company of her finest fighters, women who had trained for war since childhood, who were said to be the equals of any man. Penthesilea was everything her legends claimed. Tall, fierce, beautiful in her armor, she rode into battle like a storm. She cut through Greek lines with terrifying efficiency, her spear finding target after target. She killed many Greeks in her first engagement, causing panic among troops who had never faced such skilled female warriors. The Greeks called for Achilles, as they always did now when a threat emerged. He came, curious to face this Amazon queen everyone spoke of. They met on the field, and the duel was brief. Penthesilea fought well, better than most men Achilles had faced. But she was still mortal, and he was still Achilles. His spear found its mark, drove through her armor into her breast. As she fell dying, her helmet came off, revealing her face fully for the first time. Achilles looked down at her and felt something unexpected. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, there was something in her eyes. Courage without cruelty, skill without malice. She had come here for glory, like him, choosing battle over safety, like him. In another life, they might have been equals, companions even. The Greeks celebrated another victory, another famous opponent killed by Achilles. But one warrior, Thersites, known for his ugly appearance and uglier tongue, mocked Achilles for hesitating, for showing any emotion over an enemy. He suggested Achilles had developed feelings for the dead Amazon, made crude jokes about it. Achilles, already disturbed by his own reaction to Penthesilea's death, struck Thersites in rage. One blow, that's all it took.
The man fell dead instantly. It caused a scandal even among the Greeks who supported Achilles. Thersites had been annoying, yes, but he was Greek, a comrade. Killing him over insults crossed a line. Achilles had to be purified for the killing, a ritual cleansing performed by Odysseus. It was a reminder that even heroes had limits, that even Achilles couldn't kill without consequence when the victim was his own ally. But the incident also showed how unstable Achilles had become, how easily he resorted to violence now, how little it took to provoke his killing rage. Then came Memnon, king of the Ethiopians, leading his army to Troy's aid. Memnon was the son of Eos, goddess of the dawn, and the Trojan prince Tithonus. That made him semi-divine, like Achilles, another hero with divine parentage. He came with an army of warriors from the east, bringing fresh hope to Troy's defenders. Memnon proved to be a match for Achilles in a way few warriors had been. They fought multiple engagements, neither gaining decisive advantage. Memnon killed Antilochus, son of Nestor and friend to Achilles, another loss that struck deep. Achilles responded by hunting Memnon specifically, determined to avenge yet another fallen comrade. Their final confrontation was a true duel of equals. Both were fast, both were skilled. Both were blessed by divine parents who watched anxiously from Olympus. Zeus held his scales again, weighing their fates. Memnon's pan fell. His time was up. Achilles' spear found its mark, piercing Memnon's throat. The Ethiopian king fell, and Eos, his mother, came down to collect his body, weeping golden tears that became the morning dew. She carried her son away, while Achilles stood victorious, but feeling no triumph. Just more death, just more loss. The pile of bodies kept growing, and none of it meant anything. He knew his own death was close, could feel it like a physical presence, like someone standing just behind him, out of sight, but always there. His mother had stopped visiting, unable to bear watching him approach his prophesied end. The other Greeks gave him space, sensing that he had become something dangerous, something volatile, no longer entirely human. Then came the day that Thetis had dreaded since her son's birth, the day the prophecy came due. The Greeks were assaulting Troy's walls again, one of many such assaults over the years. Achilles led his Myrmidons, as always, fearless, taking risks that made his companions nervous. It was as if he was daring fate to strike, tired of waiting for the inevitable. Paris watched from the walls. Hector's brother, the prince who had started this whole war by taking Helen, who had cowered behind better warriors for years while braver men died. Paris was no match for Achilles in open combat, and he knew it. But he was skilled with the bow, and bows could kill from a distance where courage didn't matter. Apollo, who had always favored Troy, who had protected Hector as long as possible, who had tried to prevent this war, made a decision. The scales had tipped too far in favor of the Greeks.
Achilles was too powerful, too unstoppable. Troy would fall completely if he lived much longer. And the time had come for prophecy to fulfill itself. Apollo guided Paris's hand. The archer drew back his bow, perhaps not even fully aware of the god's presence, and loosed an arrow toward where Achilles fought below. The arrow flew true, guided by divine will, and struck the one place where Achilles was vulnerable. His heel, the spot where Thetis had held him when dipping him in the Styx all those years ago. It seemed like such a minor wound, an arrow in the ankle. Warriors took worse injuries daily and kept fighting. But this was Achilles' weak point, the only place where he was truly mortal. The arrow's poison worked quickly, spreading through his blood. He felt his leg weaken, felt himself stumbling. He pulled the arrow out, saw his own blood flowing, and understood immediately. This was it. This was the death that had been following him since Troy. Not in glorious single combat with another great warrior. Not leading a victorious charge. Just an arrow in the heel, shot by a coward from the walls, guided by a god who decided the war had gone on long enough. His men rushed to him, tried to carry him from the field. But Achilles knew there was no point. The poison was already working, already killing him from the inside. He had minutes, perhaps less. He thought of Patroclus. Soon he would see his friend again. That thought brought more comfort than anything else. He knew his own death was close, could feel it like a physical presence, like someone standing just behind him, out of sight, but always there. His mother had stopped visiting, unable to bear watching him approach his prophesied end. Then came the day that Thetis had dreaded since her son's birth. The day the prophecy came due. The Greeks were assaulting Troy's walls again, one of many such assaults over the years. Achilles led his Myrmidons, as always, fearless, taking risks that made his companions nervous. It was as if he was daring fate to strike, tired of waiting for the inevitable. Paris watched from the walls. Hector's brother, the prince who had started this whole war by taking Helen, who had cowered behind better warriors for years while braver men died. Paris was no match for Achilles in open combat, and he knew it. But he was skilled with the bow, and bows could kill from a distance where courage didn't matter. Apollo, who had always favored Troy, who had protected Hector as long as possible, who had tried to prevent this war, made a decision. The scales had tipped too far in favor of the Greeks. Achilles was too powerful, too unstoppable. Troy would fall completely if he lived much longer, and the time had come for prophecy to fulfill itself. Apollo guided Paris's hand. The archer drew back his bow, perhaps not even fully aware of the god's presence, and loosed an arrow toward where Achilles fought below.
"I'm dying," he told his men, stating the obvious. "Get my armor to safety. Don't let the Trojans take it. It's too valuable to lose." He was thinking practically, even as life left him, ensuring the Greeks wouldn't lose strategic assets when he fell. Ajax and Odysseus formed a guard around him, fighting off Trojans who were suddenly emboldened, who saw Achilles falling and rushed to finish him, to claim the glory of killing the Greeks' greatest hero. But Ajax was enormous, and Odysseus was cunning, and together they held off the Trojans long enough for others to carry Achilles' body from the field. He died before they reached camp. Swift-footed Achilles, who had outrun every foe, couldn't outrun death. His last breath left him on a stretcher, being carried by warriors who wept openly. The greatest warrior who ever lived, the man who had terrorized Troy for years, who had seemed almost invincible, was dead from an arrow to the ankle. The Greek camp descended into mourning that rivaled what had happened after Patroclus fell. This was worse in some ways. Patroclus had been beloved, yes, but Achilles had been essential. He had been their champion, their strongest weapon, the one who made them believe they could actually win this war. Without him, what chance did they have? Thetis came from the sea, leading the Nereids, all 50 of her sisters. They surrounded their nephew's body and wailed with voices that made the very ocean tremble. The sound of their grief carried for miles, a keening that made grown warriors cover their ears and weep. They held funeral games that lasted 17 days, competitions on a scale that dwarfed even what they'd done for Patroclus. Every type of contest imaginable, with prizes so lavish that the games became legendary. It was a farewell worthy of Achilles, an acknowledgment that they would not see his like again. They built a pyre visible from Troy, stacking wood higher than they had for any hero before. They dressed Achilles in his finest armor, the armor Hephaestus had made. Thetis wanted him to enter the afterlife looking like the warrior he had been. They placed Patroclus's ashes with him, mixing them together as Achilles had requested, ensuring the two friends would be together in death as they had been in life. When they lit the pyre, the flames seemed to reach the heavens. The heat was intense that watching Greeks had to step back. All through the night it burned, and Thetis stood watching, this immortal goddess witnessing her mortal son reduced to ash, living through the worst nightmare any mother could face. In the morning they collected the bones and ashes, placed them in a golden urn, and buried the urn beneath a great mound on a headland overlooking the sea. The tomb could be seen by ships passing, a landmark and a reminder. Here lies Achilles, it proclaimed. Here lies the greatest warrior, brought low by an arrow and fate. But the funeral wasn't the end of the story. There remained the matter of Achilles' armor. The magnificent armor Hephaestus had forged couldn't be buried. It was too valuable, too powerful. It would go to the next greatest warrior among the Greeks, a prize worthy of the best. 2 men claimed it. Ajax, enormous and powerful, who had fought beside Achilles, who had protected his body when he fell, and Odysseus, clever and resourceful, who had brought Achilles to Troy in the first place, who had talked him into returning to battle after his withdrawal. The Greeks were forced to judge between them. In a vote that would prove controversial, they awarded the armor to Odysseus. Perhaps they valued his cleverness over Ajax's strength.
Perhaps they were swayed by his silver tongue. Perhaps they made the right choice. But Ajax didn't think so. The giant warrior who had fought loyally for 10 years, who had held the line when others faltered, who had saved countless Greek lives, felt the dishonor deeply. He had been passed over for armor that should have been his. That night, mad with rage and wounded pride, Ajax tried to kill the Greek commanders in their sleep. Athena intervened, clouding his mind, making him attack sheep instead, thinking they were his enemies. When he came to his senses and realized what he'd done, the shame was too great. Ajax fell on his own sword, committing suicide rather than live with the humiliation. So Achilles' death led to Ajax's death, and the Greeks lost 2 of their greatest warriors in quick succession. Troy rejoiced at Achilles' death, but the celebration was muted. They had lost too much themselves. Hector was gone. Thousands of their finest had fallen. The city was exhausted, running low on food and supplies after years of siege. Achilles' death bought them time, but everyone knew it was just delay. The war continued without him. Other heroes rose to prominence. Neoptolemus, Achilles' son who had been born on Scyrus, arrived to take his father's place. Young and hungry for glory, he proved nearly as deadly as Achilles had been, though without the same otherworldly quality. It was Neoptolemus who would eventually kill Priam when Troy fell. In the underworld, Achilles' spirit was greeted by Patroclus. The stories say they walked together through the fields of Asphodel, reunited at last, their bond continuing even in death. When Odysseus later visited the underworld on his journey home, he spoke with Achilles' shade.
Achilles asked first about his father, whether Peleus still lived, whether he was honored or diminished. Then about his son, whether Neoptolemus fought bravely. Then Odysseus answered both questions, painting pictures of a father who had died peacefully and a son who fought like his father. Whether it was true or kind lies, it seemed to comfort Achilles' ghost. But when Odysseus tried to console him about death, saying at least Achilles ruled in the underworld as he had in life, Achilles cut him off. "Don't try to comfort me about death," he said. "I'd rather be a living slave to the poorest man on earth than king of all the lifeless dead." It was a stark admission. Given the choice again, even Achilles would have chosen life over glory. The greatest warrior who ever lived died as the prophecy foretold. He became immortal in fame, his name remembered 3,000 years later, his story told and retold, his glory undeniable. But he also died young, died far from home, died before seeing his father again, died in a pointless war over another man's wife. He got everything the prophecy promised, glory and eternal fame, and it cost him everything else. Whether it was worth it, not even Achilles could say. Legacy, aftermath, and the meaning. Achilles asked first about his father, whether Peleus still lived, whether he was honored or diminished. Then about his son, whether Neoptolemus fought bravely. Odysseus answered both questions, painting pictures of a father who had died peacefully and a son who fought like his father. Whether it was true or kind lies, it seemed to comfort Achilles' ghost. But when Odysseus tried to console him about death, saying at least Achilles ruled in the underworld as he had in life, Achilles cut him off. "Don't try to comfort me about death," he said. "I'd rather be a living slave to the poorest man on earth than king of all the lifeless dead." It was a stark admission. Given the choice again, even Achilles would have chosen life over glory. The greatest warrior who ever lived died as the prophecy foretold. He became immortal in fame, his name remembered 3,000 years later, his story told and retold, his glory undeniable. But he also died young, died far from home, died before seeing his father again, died in a pointless war over another man's wife. He got everything the prophecy promised, glory and eternal fame, and it cost him everything else. Whether it was worth it, not even Achilles could say. Legacy, aftermath, and the meaning of his story. Troy fell, as it was always going to fall. The famous wooden horse, Odysseus's final trick, brought Greek warriors inside the walls that had held for 10 years. They opened the gates from within. The Greek army poured through. The city burned. Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, earned his own terrible reputation that night. He killed King Priam at the altar, where the old man had sought sanctuary. He threw Astyanax, Hector's infant son, from the walls, ensuring no male heir survived to one day seek vengeance. He claimed Andromache as his prize, taking Hector's widow as a slave. The brutality of that final night was stunning even by ancient standards. Helen returned to Menelaus, the husband she had left or been taken from, depending on who told the story. They sailed home to Sparta, resuming their life as if 10 years of war and thousands of deaths were just an unfortunate interruption. Paris was dead, killed by a poisoned arrow during the siege. His love for Helen had started the war, and his death presaged its end. Odysseus began his famously troubled journey home, a voyage that would take another 10 years, bringing him to strange islands and stranger beings, teaching him that sometimes going home is harder than going to war. Ajax lay dead by his own hand, his pride unable to survive dishonor. Agamemnon would return home only to be murdered by his wife Clytemnestra, killed in his bath as revenge for sacrificing their daughter Iphigenia. The war ended, but its consequences rippled forward through generations. The victorious Greeks found that winning had cost them almost as much as losing would have. Their kingdoms had struggled in their absence. Their families had changed. Their sons barely remembered them. Many would die on the journey home, their ships wrecked by storms, sent by angry gods who had grown tired of mortal warfare. And through all of this aftermath, Achilles' name echoed. His tomb on the headland became a landmark for sailors.
Travelers would stop to pour libations, honoring the greatest warrior. Cult worship of Achilles spread across the Greek world, particularly around the Black Sea, where sailors claimed to see his ghost walking on Luce, a mysterious island also called Achilles Island. They said he lived there with other heroes, joined by Helen in some versions, all of them granted a kind of afterlife that was better than the shadowy underworld, a reward for their service to the gods' plans. Whether any of it was true or just wishful thinking by people who couldn't accept that heroes simply died like everyone else, no one could say. His story was told and retold. Homer made him the central figure of the Iliad, crafting an epic that would endure for millennia. Poets sang of his rage, his grief, his terrible beauty in battle. Playwrights wrote dramas about his choices. Philosophers debated whether he had chosen wisely, whether glory was worth the price, whether honor demanded the sacrifices he made. In Athens, young men were taught about Achilles as the ideal warrior, though his flaws were acknowledged too. He was offered as an example of excellence in combat, but also as a warning about pride and anger. Schools debated whether his withdrawal from battle was justified, or whether he had failed his duty by letting Greeks die to prove a point. The relationship with Patroclus became particularly interesting to later Greeks. Plato argued they had been lovers, with some debate about who was the Erastes and who the Oromenos in their relationship. Others maintained they were just extraordinarily close friends, that the bond between warriors could be that deep without being sexual. The ambiguity in Homer's text allowed both interpretations.
His armor became legendary. They said Odysseus eventually gave it to Neoptolemus, who used it when fighting at Troy. But after the war, it disappeared from historical record. Whether it was buried, lost at sea, or hidden away, no one knew. Sometimes artifacts would surface claiming to be pieces of Achilles' armor, but authentication was impossible. His heel gave the world a phrase. Achilles' heel entered language as a metaphor for fatal weakness, that one vulnerable spot that can bring down even the mightiest. Everyone has an Achilles' heel, the saying went. Everyone has that place where they can be hurt. The trick is knowing where it is and protecting it. The prophecy that defined his life became a favorite subject for tragedy. Writers explored what it meant to choose between long life and glory. They asked whether Achilles had really chosen, or whether his nature made the choice inevitable. A man like Achilles, they argued, could never choose obscurity. He was made for glory. The prophecy wasn't really a choice, but a description of what his character demanded. His mother's grief resonated through mythology. Thetis became the archetype of the divine parent loving a mortal child, knowing that child will die, unable to prevent it despite all her power. She tried everything to save him, dipped him in the Styx, hid him on Skyros, visited him at Troy, got him divine armor. Nothing worked. Fate found him anyway. Some stories say she eventually went mad with grief, abandoning the seas to wander the earth as a mourning mother. Others say she returned to her ocean depths, never again taking interest in mortal affairs, having learned that love of mortals brings only pain. Still others claim she visited his tomb daily, emerging from the waves to sit beside the mound, talking to her dead son as if he could hear her. The contrast between Achilles and Odysseus fascinated ancient audiences. Achilles was straightforward, honest, passionate, choosing short glory. Odysseus was clever, deceptive when necessary, strategic, choosing to survive and return home. Both were heroes, both were celebrated, but they represented different values. Sometimes cultures needed Achilles' fierce commitment. Other times they needed Odysseus's flexible pragmatism. Hector, Achilles' victim, was also remembered, but differently. He became the symbol of the doomed hero, the man fighting for a cause he knows is lost, but fighting anyway, because it's his duty. His last stand outside Troy's gates, facing Achilles despite knowing he would die, became an example of courage in the face of inevitable defeat. The desecration of Hector's body troubled even those who celebrated Achilles. It raised questions about how far grief justified cruelty, about where the line was between righteous anger and simple barbarism. The moment when Achilles dragged Hector around the walls became iconic, not as something to admire, but as an excess to contemplate, a warning about rage unchecked. Thetis begged her son this, but Achilles would not hearten. He dragged Hector around the walls, death and life in Troy. Priam's visit to Achilles' tent became possibly the most powerful moment in all Greek literature. Two enemies brought together by grief, recognizing their shared humanity despite the war between them. It showed that even in Achilles, even in his darkest hour, there was still capacity for mercy, for recognizing someone else's suffering. That scene was repeatedly referenced in discussions of what it meant to be civilized, what separated humans from animals. The ability to recognize suffering in your enemy, to show mercy when you have power to be cruel, to see shared humanity across battle lines. This was presented as the highest achievement, the moment when Achilles transcended being merely a great warrior and became something more admirable. Say slowly as a storyteller. Future wars would be fought. Future heroes would rise. But none quite captured imagination like Achilles. Alexander the Great claimed to be descended from him, visited his tomb before conquering Persia, tried to model himself after the greatest warrior. Roman generals invoked his name. Medieval knights learned his story. Even into modern times, he remained the archetypal warrior. What made him endure? Perhaps it was the tragedy, the foreknowledge of death making every choice matter more, the prophecy giving him agency over his fate even as it constrained him. He could have lived long and been forgotten. He chose glory and death. That choice resonated across cultures and centuries. Perhaps it was the depth of his emotions. He wasn't a cold, calculating warrior. He felt everything intensely. Love for Patroclus, rage at dishonor, grief at loss.
His emotions were as excessive as his combat prowess. He was more human than human, feeling what everyone felt, but amplified to mythological proportions. Or perhaps it was the fundamental question his story posed. What are you willing to sacrifice for glory, for fame, for being remembered? And is it worth it? Achilles answered yes. Then, in the underworld, seemed to regret it. That ambiguity, that lack of clear answer, kept his story relevant. As you drift toward sleep tonight, consider what Achilles represents. Not just ancient history, not just mythology, but something eternal about human nature. The desire to matter, to be remembered, to achieve something great even if it costs everything. The tension between choosing a safe, long life or a risky, memorable one. Most of us don't face that choice so starkly. We don't get prophecies laying out our options. We muddle through, making smaller choices, compromising between safety and significance. But at the extremes, at the edges of human experience, we find Achilles, choosing glory, choosing to be remembered, choosing to burn bright rather than fade slow. Whether he chose wisely, you'll have to decide for yourself. The answer probably depends on what you value, what you believe makes a life meaningful. Long years of quiet contentment, or brief years of blazing achievement? Obscurity with family, or glory with early death? There's no objective answer. There's only what each person can live with. Achilles lived with his choice until the arrow found his heel. Lived with it when Patroclus died. Lived with it when Hector fell. Lived with it in his last moments, bleeding from a tiny wound in his ankle, understanding that prophecy always comes true, that fate always collects its debts. His story ends on that battlefield outside Troy, his body carried by weeping warriors, his mother coming from the sea to mourn him, his name entering legend. But the questions his story raises don't end. They continue, passed down through 3,000 years, still relevant, still provocative, still making people wonder about the choices they make and the lives they lead. So, as you close your eyes tonight, as sleep takes you, remember Achilles. Remember the swift-footed warrior who chose glory. Remember Patroclus, whose love defined him. Remember Hector, who faced impossible odds with courage. Remember Priam, who kissed the hands of his son's killer. Remember all of them, these ancient figures whose humanity transcends their mythological status. And if you enjoyed this journey through the complete story of Achilles, from birth to death and beyond, please like and subscribe. Your support helps us create more of these long-form, detailed explorations of history and mythology. Until next time, sleep well, and may your dreams carry echoes of ancient glory.